Chapter 5174. Linny was waiting for Xue Jianfeng to say that. He smiled. Alright, it's just a test. We'll participate. That's more like it. Only then did Xue Jianfeng smile in satisfaction. The rest didn't matter. To him, as long as Linny and the others could participate in the competition, his plan would be halfway to success. Alright, we've said what we need to say. Go back and prepare yourselves, Wuxia announced. Everyone dispersed to rest and prepare for the competition in 3 days. Linny, on the other hand, gathered Lingshan and the others together. There's only 3 days left, but as the saying goes, sharpening a spear at the last minute isn't the fastest, but it'll still help. Otherwise, the competition won't be easy to fool. Boss, it's only 3 days, isn't it too late? Tian smiled bitterly. It's not late, not at all. Linny smiled and said to everyone, as long as you remember what I'm about to teach you, I don't know if it'll be useful for anything else, but it should be useful for the upcoming competition. What is it? 3 days? The group asked curiously. Haha, it's nothing profound. Do you still remember the summary of the practitioner's arts I received a few days ago? Linny smiled. Yes, but those are the arts of the sects on Sky Class Island, right? What's the use? Lingshan asked curiously. Judging from the North Island's Blue Cloud sect and other clues, Sky Class Island and the immemorial Small Jianghu are inextricably linked. The same sects in these two places practice basically the same mental cultivation. So although this is a summary of the mental cultivation of the sects in Sky Class Island, it can also be said to be a summary of the mental cultivation of the immemorial sections. Linny explained. The group nodded, but they were still confused. What does that have to do with the test? It's simple. Since we have the arts of the sects, we can use it to figure out the fighting style of the disciples and grasp their strengths and weaknesses. From there, we can come up with the most effective strategy. I've also created some counter moves while studying the manuals, Linny said. Counter moves. The group's eyes lit up. That's right, there aren't many. Each sect only has 2 or 3 moves, and they're not complicated, simple and practical. If you guys can learn these moves in 3 days, the benefits will be obvious. Linny nodded. Fuck. Boss, you're not just making us cram at the last minute, you're bringing a cheat sheet with you. If we learn all of this, we'll be able to beat the disciples of the ancient sects in the test. Tian said happily. That's not necessarily the case. In order for the counter moves I've taught you to be effective, you need to have a certain level of strength. If the opponent's strength is too much higher than yours, then it won't be effective. But if that's the case, there's no point thinking about it. It's better to just surrender. Linny smiled and said, Alright, time's running out. Let's start. Alright. Everyone replied in unison. 3 days later, everyone on the transit islands gathered again, including Wuxia. Everyone was staring at the teleportation formation eagerly. Finally, a white light flashed, and a scroll appeared in the portal. Wuxia opened it immediately, and the rules of the test were written on it. Wuxia looked through the entire document and nodded while stroking his beard. He then announced, Everyone listen carefully. What I'm about to say is the rules of this trial. If you miss a word, it'll be your loss. Yes. The group listened attentively. First, the test will be divided into 8 teams. Those below Foundation Establishment will be in 1 team. Early Stage Foundation Establishment, Peak Early Stage Foundation Establishment, Mid-Stage Foundation Establishment, Peak Mid-Stage Foundation Establishment, Late Stage Foundation Establishment, Peak Late Stage Foundation Establishment, and Perfect Stage Foundation Establishment will be in their own team. Everyone, please take your seats. Now, please get into your teams, Wuxia ordered, and the group began to line up according to their strength. This moment, no one would play any tricks. Firstly, they did not know the intention of such a team. Secondly, there were no secrets between the brothers in the sect. They knew each other's strength and realm clearly. Moreover, Wuxia, a gold core stage master, was watching them. It was impossible to fool them even if they wanted to. Linny gave the group a look, and Lingshan and the others nodded. Walking into the group of early phase foundations, this caused quite a commotion. A lot of people didn't realize that they'd all succeeded, thinking that they were still Sky Class full mastery. But they were just surprised for a moment, not really taking Lingshan and the others seriously. After all, even if they succeeded in their foundation establishment, They were just the weakest early stage. They posed no threat to Archaic Alliance disciples, so naturally they didn't have to worry about them. As for Lin Yi himself, while he was the elder master of the Green Cloud sect, that identity was only useful in front of people like Exionejia. The Archaic Alliance didn't recognize that. Being able to recognize him as a member of the Archaic Alliance was already giving face to the Green Cloud sect. If he wanted to participate in the Archaic test, he had to pass the test like everyone else. Lin Yi didn't mind at all. He walked into the group of perfect stage practitioners. No one below Golden Core would be his match no matter what the test was. But there was one exception. It was Swordsmanship, who was smiling coldly at the side. This guy had been following the professor's orders and didn't show his strength. On the surface, he was still a perfect stage practitioner. He couldn't help but feel that it was a pity. If it weren't for the strict order from above not to touch Lin Yi, he would have killed Lin Yi to avenge himself. I can't kill him, but this is a fair opportunity. I can use this chance to beat him up. Even the higher-ups can't say anything about it, Shui Jianfeng thought. In the blink of an eye, everyone had lined up. Only 2 people stood outside. One was Exionejia and the other was Bing Wuxia. While they weren't the leader, they were still Golden Core practitioners. There was no point in them participating in the test. Alright, I will now announce the rules of the test. It's simple. Every team will draw lots to fight each other. There will be a round every 2 days for 10 consecutive days, and there will be a total of 5 rounds. As long as you win 3 rounds, you'll automatically qualify for the test, Exionejia announced. Chapter 5175. On the other hand, if one couldn't even win 3 matches, then no matter how superior one's spirit root was, it would be meaningless. There were indeed times when a genius would be buried, but if one couldn't even win 3 out of 5 matches, then he would be a complete piece of trash, and it would be meaningless to talk about anything else. After observing the crowd's reaction, Exionejia continued, "Of course, this rule only applies to most of the ordinary disciples. For those genius disciples with extraordinary strength, other than winning 3 out of 5 battles, there's another easier option, which is to challenge someone of a higher level." Challenge someone of a higher level? Everyone was shocked. This was something unimaginable for ordinary disciples, but it was also the label of a genius disciple. Those who could challenge someone of a higher level were not easy to deal with. Naturally, they were considered as genius disciples. That's right. You can challenge anyone of a higher level. There's no limit to the number of times, and the other party can't refuse. As long as one of you can succeed once, then you won't have to participate in the regular competition and will automatically qualify for the trial. Exionejia nodded. Everyone's expressions were different. Apart from the normal rules, there was also a special rule. This grand competition was well thought out. It was clear that the higher-ups of the Archaic Alliance attached great importance to this. Because of this, they had to think of a way to perform well. This wasn't just related to the primeval smelting trials, it was also related to their future in the Archaic Alliance. Martial Uncle Exion, may I ask what will happen if you can't challenge someone of a higher level, or win 3 out of 5 battles in the regular competition? Everyone couldn't help but be worried. That means you don't qualify for the trial. You'll be sent back to the archaic underworld after the trial in the secular world. Of course, even if you win 3 out of 5 battles, you have to break through to the Foundation Establishment realm before the archaic trials begins. Otherwise, you'll be automatically removed from the Archaic Alliance, and naturally, you won't be qualified to participate in the archaic trials. Exionejia explained. As soon as this was said, everyone looked at each other. According to Exionejia's explanation, wouldn't it mean that half of the people would be eliminated? Even though the grand competition would be held in the primeval trials in the past, and some people would be eliminated every single time, it would at most be a formality, and some people at the bottom of the rankings would be eliminated. There had never been a precedent of half of the people being eliminated. After all, the grand competition was only the prelude to the primeval trials, and it wasn't the primeval competition, so how could it be so serious? Martial Uncle Exion, this is the grand competition and not the primordial grand competition. There's no need to go so far, right? It's not normal. However, the primordial trial this time is a once-in-a-thousand-years event. The degree of danger is far more than usual. It's reasonable for the trial competition to be stricter. This is to be responsible for your safety. Exionejia said seriously. But if it's really for safety reasons, it's better to let us, the stronger disciples, go. There's no need to make it so complicated, right? The one who spoke was a late Foundation establishment disciple. The other stronger disciples of the Archaic Alliance echoed him, all of them filled with righteous indignation. Now, with the rules of 3 wins out of 5 duels, the biggest victims were none other than them. Disciples like them who were at the late stage of the Foundation establishment realm or even higher should have the qualifications to participate in the primeval trials. However, once this rule was announced, even amongst them, a group of people would inevitably be eliminated. Think about it, if even dignified disciples at the peak of the Foundation establishment realm didn't have the chance to participate in the primeval trials, wouldn't they become the laughingstock of others if word of this got out? Hee. This is the unanimous decision of the higher-ups of the Archaic Alliance. Do any of you have any objections? Exionejia's words stunned everyone. No matter how dissatisfied they were, they would never dare to go against the higher-ups of the Archaic Alliance. Otherwise, not only would their future be in danger, they might even lose their lives. Moreover, although they were not weak, the ones who were really dissatisfied with this rule were only those disciples who were at the bottom of the same level. The truly outstanding core disciples of each sect would not care about this little difficulty. To put it bluntly, only the weak would complain like this. Since they were the weak, how could they have the confidence to go against the higher-ups of the Archaic Alliance? If it were Bing Wuqing facing these people's complaints, she would at most snort coldly and would not even bother to explain. However, Exionejia was much more honest. Seeing that everyone seemed to be dissatisfied, he thought about it and decided to explain a little. I've already said that the purpose of this trial competition is to select disciples who have both strength and potential. Moreover, the rules of the competition are not that strict. If you really meet the requirements, it won't be difficult to qualify for the trials. However, if you only have the level but no potential, then there's nothing much to say. Instead of going to the primeval trials and hindering other disciples with more potential, it's better for you to return to the primeval Jianghu as soon as possible, said Exionejia. His words were not very pleasant to hear, but it was the truth. From the perspective of each primeval sect, the value of a disciple with Foundation establishment consummation at the bottom was far less than that of a disciple with outstanding aptitude in the early stage of Foundation establishment consummation. However, if these two people were to go to the primeval trials at the same time, the disciple with Foundation establishment consummation would definitely benefit. After all, under normal circumstances, a disciple in the early stage of Foundation establishment consummation would not be a match for a disciple with Foundation establishment consummation. Therefore, it would easily lead to a situation that would be extremely troublesome for the higher-ups of all primeval sects. In the primeval trials, those talented disciples with outstanding aptitude who were worthy of being nurtured would find it difficult to advance. Instead, their opportunities would be snatched away by high-level disciples with no potential at the bottom. However, even the higher-ups of the Archaic Alliance could not force that only those talented disciples could obtain the opportunities. Even if the other disciples were of a higher level and stronger strength, they had to stand aside. If such an inhumane rule was really announced, many ordinary disciples would have long rebelled. That was why there was such an unprecedented rule. Not only could it be used to select outstanding disciples of different levels, but it could also be used to eliminate those mediocre disciples who only had high levels but were actually at the bottom. It could be said that it was killing 2 birds with 1 stone to clear the obstacles for those talented disciples who were truly worthy of being nurtured. At this point, even if everyone was unwilling in their hearts, they didn't dare say anything more. After all, the matter had already been decided, and it would be useless no matter how much they grumbled. Instead, it would bring trouble to themselves, so it was better to make use of this time to properly plan for the upcoming grand competition. Chapter 5176. Everyone looked at each other, and no one spoke for a while. Challenging someone of a higher level was no small matter, not to mention that the bird that sticks out gets shot first. In this kind of situation, whoever was the first to step out to challenge someone of a higher level would be in the limelight, but at the same time they would also be under a great deal of pressure. This was especially true for the high-level disciple they challenged. He would definitely go all out. Otherwise, if he was defeated by someone of a higher level in front of everyone, he would not be able to face anyone in the future. Linny was a foundation perfection practitioner, and he was already the highest level in the tournament. Naturally, there was no such thing as challenging someone of a higher level. As for Lingshan and the others, they were only at foundation establishment not long ago, and naturally wouldn't think of challenging someone of a higher level. As a result, they waited patiently for the lots to be drawn. Half an hour passed, and still no one stood out to challenge someone of a higher level. Exionejia coughed dryly and was about to announce the draw when someone finally spoke up. "Uncle Exine, why don't I try?" The crowd went into an uproar at the words, and all eyes focused on a young man. He had delicate features and a calm aura around him. He looked like he had nothing to do with the world, but if one looked closely, they would realize that there was an indescribable aura hidden within his calmness. Even Linny couldn't help but sigh to himself. This kid was extraordinary. Ling Tianyu of the Thousand Blades sect. "Who would you like to challenge?" Exionejia asked. Facing this Ling Tianyu, even he, as the leader of the group, didn't dare to be careless. One had to know that this kid was the young master of the Thousand Blades sect, and this wasn't as simple as being a second-generation practitioner. Ever since the previous head of the Thousand Blades sect died in the hands of a heretic, Ling Tianyu had become the head of the Thousand Blades sect at a young age. Even though he was only at the peak of the late phase of foundation establishment, he still received the support of the entire sect. This was not only because he had the bloodline of the former sect master, but also because the ancient Jianghu was a world where strength was respected. Without strength, bloodline inheritance was just a joke. The reason why Ling Tianyu was able to gain the recognition of the Thousand Blades faction with his cultivation at the peak of the late foundation establishment realm was naturally not because of absolute strength, but because of his incomparable talent. It was rumored that the strongest foundation establishment cultivator of the Archaic Alliance was Xue Jianfeng of the Snowsword faction, but that was only because Xue Jianfeng was very high profile. On the other hand, as the young master of the Thousand Blades faction, Ling Tianyu was extremely low-key and rarely fought with others. Only the inner disciples of the Thousand Blades faction knew a thing or two about him. If the two of them really had a chance to fight, it would be very difficult to say who would win. On the contrary, more people would favor Yin Tianyu, as he was the uncrowned king. This will be interesting. Ling Tianyu will definitely challenge Xue Jianfeng. This is the battle for the #1 foundation establishment cultivator of the Ancient Alliance. Everyone couldn't help but be excited. Ling Tianyu was an expert at the peak of the late foundation establishment realm. He could only challenge those at the peak of the foundation establishment realm, and his representative was Xue Jianfeng. Who was stronger between Xue Jianfeng and Ling Tianyu? This was a point that had been debated endlessly. It was a pity that the two of them had never met each other. Now they could finally have a showdown in front of everyone. It seemed that this kid really wanted to challenge him. Xue Jianfeng muttered to himself. To be honest, if he was still an expert at the peak of the foundation establishment realm, he might really be a little afraid. After all, Ling Tianyu was no small matter. But now that he was at the early gold core realm, there was nothing to worry about. No matter how powerful Ling Tianyu was, could he, as a mere peak of the late foundation establishment realm, challenge an early gold core realm? What a joke. Martial Uncle Xian, the person I want to challenge is him. Ling Tianyu smiled slightly and his gaze fell on a person. This time the crowd was in an uproar again. The person he wanted to challenge was not Xue Jianfeng but Lin Yi. "You want to challenge me?" Lin Yi was also a little stunned. "Yes, this should be fine, right?" Ling Tianyu confirmed with his trademark gentle smile on his face. "Yes." Exionejia nodded. He didn't know why Ling Tianyu suddenly wanted to challenge Lin Yi, but according to the rules of the competition there was no problem. Moreover, Lin Yi couldn't refuse. "Can I ask why you chose me?" Lin Yi asked curiously. It was not strange for someone like Ling Tianyu to take the path of challenging those at a higher level. But instead of those disciples of the Archaic Alliance, he chose him. Did he think that he was a pushover? "Forgive me for being presumptuous, but I am purely curious." Ling Tianyu nodded slightly. "Curious? That's a little interesting." Lin Yi couldn't help but be amused. He turned to Exionejia and said, "Then can we start now?" "Yes, we can. Only after the challenge is over will we start the competition by drawing lots." Exionejia nodded and then reminded in a low voice, "Martial Uncle, this Ling Tianyu is not to be trifled with. You must be careful. If you lose to someone at a higher level, not only will you lose face, you will also lose the qualification to participate in the competition. Although this sentence was not said clearly, everyone knew that it was the truth. In this grand competition, even disciples who were at a disadvantage in a battle of the same level would be disqualified. If they were defeated by someone who was a level higher than them, then there was no need to say anything more. I know. Linny smiled indifferently. This Ling Tianyu seemed a little unfathomable. Unfortunately, he was an existence comparable to a magnate realm expert. No matter how strong Ling Tianyu's aptitude was, he was just a seedling in Lin Yi's eyes. There was really nothing to worry about. Challenging someone of a higher level would attract a lot of attention, and everyone retreated to the side, leaving Lin Yi and Ling Tianyu alone. Then sorry for offending you. Ling Tianyu cupped his hands with a smile, and then slowly took out a silk belt from his bosom in front of everyone. Everyone was puzzled. Could this silk belt be his weapon? This Ling Tianyu is said to be a god. Why would he use such a sissy weapon? Everyone couldn't help but look at each other. That's right. Our archaic alliance has always attached importance to weapons, and all the cultivation of the Thousand Blades faction is based on weapons. As the young master of the Thousand Blades faction, Ling Tianyu should have inherited a divine weapon. Why would he use a sissy silk belt? Doesn't look like a big deal. Someone frowned and muttered. Not only them but even Bing Wuqing, Shuejianfeng, and Xianijia were staring at the ribbon fluttering in the air. They were all experts in the gold core stage, but none of them would underestimate Ling Tianyu. After all, he was someone who could become the leader of the Thousand Blades sect. Chapter 5177. As far as the disciples of the Thousand Blades faction were concerned, even ordinary disciples in the Foundation establishment realm could control more than a dozen weapons at the same time. Those with better aptitude could control dozens of weapons at the same time. However, it was very difficult for them to advance further. When they reached the nascent soul realm, they could at most control 100 weapons at the same time. Lin Yi had only roughly studied the Thousand Blades sect's practitioner's arts, but he knew where the difficulties lay. The biggest difficulty lay in multitasking. Controlling each weapon required a part of one's attention, and it wasn't easy for a normal person to do two things at the same time. Controlling 100 weapons at the same time required 100 multitasking. Even an idiot could figure out how difficult this was. It was definitely at an inhuman level. However, the Ling Tianyu in front of him was puzzling. He did not show a lot of weapons like the other disciples of the Thousand Blades faction. Instead, he only showed a ribbon that seemed to be harmless. What did this mean? Was he hiding his strength? Or was this inconspicuous ribbon his trump card? Lin Yi did not move. He just stood there quietly, waiting for Ling Tianyu's next move. At his level, it was impossible for him to treat the other party as a real threat. However, he would not underestimate the enemy. He was observing Ling Tianyu and coping with all changes by remaining unchanged. While Lin Yi was observing Ling Tianyu was also observing his reaction. As he said, he was indeed very curious about Lin Yi. A powerful primordial spirit expert, the martial granduncle of the Blue Cloud sect in the North Island, Lin Yi was a mystery to all the disciples of the primordial age. Although Ling Tianyu had not made any moves in the past 10 months, he felt that it was necessary to understand Lin Yi's background in both the short and long term. Otherwise, there would be one more uncontrollable factor in the upcoming primordial trial. Suddenly, the ribbon that was fluttering in the air became taut with a swish. Then with a piercing sound, it shot toward Lin Yi like a sharp arrow. Everyone's expression changed when they saw this. To be able to have such power, it seemed that this ribbon was indeed not an ordinary item. Facing the ribbon that was rushing toward him, Lin Yi was still unmoved. Until the ribbon was less than half a foot away from him, he stretched out 2 fingers and calmly clamped it. Xianijia nodded secretly. This scene seemed ordinary, but it was not easy to be as calm as Lin Yi. At least no one present could do it. Even he, a master in the early stage of Gold Core Realm, dared not guarantee it. However, the ribbon did not stop after being clamped. Instead, it wriggled wildly like a snake. But in the eyes of others, it was just a futile struggle. After all, how could a soft ribbon do any damage? However, Lin Yi's expression changed. He chose to let go of it without hesitation. Almost at the same time when he let go, a large number of flying needles suddenly shot out from the ribbon. This scene was so sudden that everyone present gasped and looked horrified. Almost all of them were deceived by the inconspicuous shape of the ribbon. They did not expect that there were so many flying needles hidden in the ribbon. If it had been them, they would have already been pierced by the flying needles and died without a burial ground with just one move. It was a pity that Ling Tianyu was facing Lin Yi. Even if these flying needles were hidden very well and almost integrated with the ribbon, it was difficult to be detected by the divine sense under normal circumstances. However, Lin Yi not only had a far more sensitive divine sense than ordinary people, but also a beast-like sense of danger. If he did not detect them in advance, how could he suddenly let go of the ribbon? What a powerful movement technique! Ling Tianyu's eyes brightened. What shocked him was not that Lin Yi could detect them in advance, but that Lin Yi could calmly dodge the sudden attack of the flying needles at such a close distance and come out unscathed. With Ling Tianyu's identity, his sparring partners in the Thousand Blades sect were at least in the gold core stage. However, even if they were experts in the gold core stage, they could at most block his flying needles with their protective genuine qi. No one had ever been able to dodge it completely like Lin Yi. Such a movement technique was simply unheard of and unseen. Likewise, to be able to practice the legendary flying blades of 1,000 blades, Your Excellency, is also not simple. Lin Yi smiled faintly. Flying blades of 1,000 blades? Hearing this, everyone was shocked again. They carefully counted the number of flying needles flying in the air at this moment. Only then did they exclaim in shock. 999 flying needles in that ribbon. It really is a flying blades of 1,000 blades. How is this possible? Isn't the 1,000 blades flying together just an illusory legend? Ling Tianyu can actually do it? Even though they had seen it with their own eyes, they still felt it was incredible. One had to know that the 100 blades simultaneous release was already very impressive. Even the experts of the 1,000 blades faction had to be at least nascent soul realm old monsters to be able to do it. Multitasking wasn't something that could be practiced just because one wanted to. If one didn't have enough aptitude, it would be useless even if one practiced for thousands of years. As for the 1,000 blades simultaneous release, that required one to multitask 1,000 times. The difficulty was more than 10,000 times that of multitasking. This wasn't something that humans could do, but the truth was right in front of them. Ling Tianyu, who was merely at the peak of the late stage of the Foundation establishment realm, had managed to achieve the legendary 1,000 blades flying together. Was he even human? No wonder everyone in the 1,000 blades sect supports him to be the sect leader. He's such an amazing genius. No wonder. Xianijia finally understood. Regarding the matter of Ling Tianyu becoming the sect leader of the 1,000 Blades sect, the entire Archaic Alliance had different guesses, including the higher-ups of the various archaic sects and families. No matter how talented he was, it was too childish to let Ling Tianyu, who was only at the peak of the late stage of the Foundation establishment realm, become the sect leader of a sect. But now that he had seen the 1,000 blades flying together with his own eyes, Xianijia finally understood that the 1,000 Blades sect was not stupid. Instead, it was because they had found a powerful backer. Once this Ling Tianyu grew up, no one in the entire Archaic Alliance would be his opponent. At that time, the 1,000 Blades sect would definitely sweep away the declining trend and have a promising future. Not only Xianijia, but even Bing Wuqing, who was next to him, was moved. Ling Tianyu, who had achieved the 1,000 blades flying together, could not be measured by common sense. Even if he was only at the peak of the late stage of the Foundation establishment realm, he was enough to be on an equal footing with experts in the Gold Core stage. If time passed, even they would have to look up to him. Chapter 5178. He had always thought that he was worthy of his title as the number one in the Foundation establishment realm and could suppress Ling Tianyu. Now that he thought about it, it was really ridiculous. In front of the 1,000 flying blades, he, the so-called number one in the Foundation establishment realm, was nothing. No, this Ling Tianyu must be eliminated while he was still young. Otherwise, he would definitely be a great trouble in the future. Although he was proud, Swordsmanship was not a fool. It was true that he was an early-stage Gold Core realm expert, had a father who was the deputy head of the Snowsword faction, and had a mysterious and powerful backer in the center. But all of these were nothing in front of Ling Tianyu's 1,000 flying blades. Such a threat must be nipped in the bud. Your Excellency has good eyesight. I admire you. Ling Tianyu was slightly taken aback. He didn't expect Lin Yi's observation skills to be so sharp that he could count the number of flying needles in an instant. If it wasn't for his reminder, the others might not have realized this so quickly. You're too polite. I didn't expect to see the glory of the 1,000 flying blades today. The Archaic Alliance is really full of talents. But it's a pity. Lin Yi shook his head meaningfully. What's a pity? Ling Tianyu looked at him and asked. Everyone present was also curious. This was the legendary 1,000 flying blades. What was there to pity about? Of course it's a pity that your current realm is too low. Given time you can indeed become an expert. As for now you're still far from that level, Lin Yi said bluntly in front of everyone. Everyone looked at him, thinking that this guy really knew how to show off. They didn't know that what Lin Yi said was the truth. Ling Tianyu's 1,000 flying blades was indeed real, but his 1,000 flying blades were all insignificant flying needles. All of them added up didn't even weigh half a gene. Even if it was the 1,000 flying blades, it was only the weakest version. It was fine to scare others, but it was unrealistic to scare Lin Yi. Moreover, with the strength of Lin Yi's body, let alone the weakest version, even if the 1,000 flying blades were real divine weapons, he would at most be a formidable opponent. How could he be scared? Really? Then I'll have to ask for your guidance. Although Ling Tianyu still had a gentle expression on his face, he was, after all, the young master of the 1,000 Blades sect, a supreme figure who had mastered the flying blades technique. It would be strange if his arrogance wasn't provoked by Lin Yi's words. Go ahead. Lin Yi smiled faintly and made a gesture of invitation. However, in the eyes of the people around him, it was pure pretentiousness. Ling Tianyu's expression froze. His 10 fingers moved slightly, and the 999 flying needles floating in the air instantly condensed on the ribbon. The ribbon twisted back and forth, and the tip twisted into the shape of a snake's head. At first glance, it looked exactly like a hydralisk with long thorns all over its body. The hydralisk danced rapidly in the air, whistling fiercely. Its momentum was terrifying, and the onlookers could not help but tremble with fear. Even Wuxia, a master in the early stage of Gold Core, felt his eyelids twitching. Only Lin Yi, who was in the field, was not in a hurry. Instead, the corner of his mouth slightly raised to reveal a playful smile. After hovering for a moment, the hydralisk suddenly pounced on Lin Yi from behind. Speed was extremely fast, but Lin Yi was faster. He easily dodged it with a flash. It's only Marshal Granduncle. If it were anyone else, they wouldn't be able to dodge this attack. Wuxia commented. This was not a compliment to Lin Yi, but the truth. The attack of the hydralisk was so fast that even with his body movement, it was impossible for him to avoid it easily. Looking at the whole field, there was no other person except Lin Yi. No matter how fast your body movement is, can you avoid the Divine Dragon's Tail Whip? Ling Tianyu was extremely confident. The hydralisk was covered with flying needles. In the face of such an attack, ordinary people's first reaction was not to face it head-on. They were not only afraid of pain but also afraid of poison. Therefore, Lin Yi's response was completely within his expectation. The hydralisk was more than 3 feet long, and it had already surrounded Lin Yi. Therefore, no matter how Lin Yi dodged, it was impossible for him to avoid this long-prepared move. Divine Dragon's Tail Whip? Lin Yi smiled and released a murderous aura of the 5 elements. Why don't we see whose dragon is more powerful? The dragon roared, and the murderous aura of the 5 elements immediately met the hydralisk. Then with a loud bang, the hydralisk was torn into pieces, and the flying needles fell to the ground. How could this be? Ling Tianyu couldn't help but turn pale. He was very confident in his move. Even an expert in the early stage of Gold Core realm said that it was difficult to deal with the Divine Dragon's Tail Whip. He didn't expect that it would be easily broken by Lin Yi. Moreover, it was a domineering way of meeting force with force. More importantly, it was only a stream of genuine qi. How could there be such a terrifying genuine qi in the world? Was this person really only at the peak of Foundation establishment? Only Lin Yi himself was not surprised. No matter how powerful the 1,000 blades flying together was, could it be more powerful than the murderous aura of the 5 elements? There is always someone better than you, There is nothing strange about this, right? Linny smiled faintly and said, if the 1,000 blades flying together only has this little strength, it is too disappointing. In his view, the hydralisk that Ling Tianyu made was not ordinary. At first glance, it seemed to be in line with the principle that the weapons of the 1,000 blades sect complemented each other. But this principle was only for ordinary disciples. For a genius like Ling Tianyu, it was too mediocre. If the legendary 1,000 blades flying together was really used in this way, it would be useless. Really? My skills are not good enough. I have embarrassed myself in front of you. Ling Tianyu looked as calm as usual at this time, without the slightest hint of worry. However, the movements of his hands did not stop at all. After the flying needles fell, they did not recondense on the ribbon. Instead, they simply formed their own formation. At first glance, they looked like a dense swarm of bees. Although the attacks between them seemed messy, they cooperated with each other, as if there was some kind of profound military strategy. Oh, arrangement, this is a little interesting. Linny controlled the murderous aura of the 5 elements to deal with these flying needles with great interest. The more he fought, the more shocked he became. This Ling Tianyu's talent was really very high. In terms of power, although the flying needles were far inferior to the hydralisk, they had become more difficult to deal with now that they had broken up into smaller groups. Just a little interesting? Ling Tianyu smiled. Before his voice died away, the swarm of flying needle bees, which had been big and small just a moment ago, became even more scattered. Almost every flying needle was fighting on its own. The power of each attack became weaker, but at the same time it became more frequent and harder to guard against. Chapter 5179. If these flying needles were poisoned, Linny would have been a corpse long ago. Xue Jianfeng sneered at the scene. For him, both Linny and Ling Tianyu were targets that had to be eliminated. Unfortunately, because of the order from the higher-ups of the center, he did not have the guts to touch Linny at all. Ling Tianyu was the lifeblood of the 1,000 Blades faction. If he touched this guy, the entire 1,000 Blades faction would have to fight him to the death. With his current strength, it was tantamount to setting himself on fire. Humph, the 1,000 Blades faction used to be one of the 4 major sects and families. Although it has declined now, it is still a decent faction. As the head of the 1,000 Blades faction, how could Ling Tianyu use such insidious and despicable means? Xianijie glanced at Xue Jianfeng disdainfully. A gentleman would not do such a thing. But it was obvious that Xue Jianfeng did not feel any pressure at all. Xue Jianfeng snorted disdainfully. If it was in the past, he would still care about his image, but after being crippled twice, his temperament had changed greatly. Especially now that he was secretly relying on the center. He would stop at nothing to achieve his goals. Sinister methods like poison were naturally not a problem. At this time, Bing Wuqing suddenly said, even if the needles are really poisoned, Ling Tianyu cannot hurt Linny at all. What? Everyone was shocked when they heard this. After a closer look, they finally found that although the 999 flying needles of Ling Tianyu had surrounded Linny so tightly that it was impossible to defend against them, so far Linny had not been pierced by a single needle. 90% of the flying needles were dodged by Linny's body movement. As for the remaining 10%, every time they got close to Linny, they were blocked by his protective genuine qi and could not advance an inch, let alone cause any damage. What a strong protective genuine qi! Everyone was shocked. At the level of foundation establishment consummation, the strength of the protective genuine qi was indeed strong enough to block ordinary punches, palms, and blunt weapons. But Ling Tianyu's flying needles were almost the natural enemy of protective genuine qi. It only took 1% of protective genuine qi to defend against ordinary attacks, but 10% of protective genuine qi was needed to defend against flying needles. Linny was just a peak foundation establishment expert. He wasn't even a golden core stage expert, so how could his protective qi be so strong? TSK, no matter how strong his protective qi is, what's the point? Even if Linny can hold on for a while, he won't be able to withstand it for long. Sooner or later, he will be exhausted to death by Ling Tianyu. In my opinion, Linny, this salted fish, can't turn over a new leaf. How dare he call himself the martial granduncle of the Blue Cloud sect in the North Island? This time he was successfully challenged by someone who was a level higher than him, and he was the first one. You've really lost all your face. Xue Jianfeng took the opportunity to ridicule. Xianijie frowned but did not refute. At least from the current situation, Linny was not in a good situation. As long as he could not get rid of the attack of 999 flying needles, he could only rely on his protective genuine qi to fight with Ling Tianyu. Moreover, every time Ling Tianyu consumed a little bit of his protective genuine qi, he would consume 10 or even 100 of his protective genuine qi. Bing Wuqing, on the other hand, was full of disapproval, but she did not show it on her face. After all, he had fought with Lin Yi before. Even he, a Golden Core late-stage expert, couldn't do anything to Lin Yi, let alone Ling Tianyu, who was only at the peak of the Foundation establishment late stage. As for Lingshan and the others, they were even less worried. Even if they could not see anything with their level, they had absolute confidence in Lin Yi. 1,000 flying needles were nothing. As time passed, Lin Yi was still trapped in the attack of 999 flying needles. The situation was as tense as before. This kind of battle of attrition was within everyone's expectations. However, what surprised them was that Lin Yi had been holding on until now without a scratch. What was even more ridiculous was that he seemed to be at ease, and did not seem to be at the end of his rope. This kid could really hold on. Xue Jianfeng furrowed his brows. Compared to Ling Tianyu, who was a potential formidable opponent, Xue Jianfeng's brows furrowed. Compared to Ling Tianyu, who was a potential rival, he was more inclined to humiliate Lin Yi. After all, there was a bloody feud between him and Lin Yi. He immediately said, "Uncle Xian, it's almost the time for 2 incense sticks to burn. Are we going to let them continue like this? It's completely meaningless. There should be a time limit, right?" There is no time limit. There are only 2 results in all the battles of the trial competition. Either the winner is decided directly, or someone admits defeat. There is no third possibility. Xianijie glanced at him and curled his lips. You're talking about a normal competition, but this is a cross-level challenge. We can't keep dragging on, can we? Are we going to let everyone wait like this? It's been 2 incense sticks time, anyone can tell who is stronger. Uncle Xian, are you being selfish and siding with the Green Cloud sex people from the North Island? Xue Jianfeng said in a strange tone. Oh? Who is stronger and who is weaker? Why can't I see it? Why don't you, Xue Jianfeng, tell us? Xianijie snorted. Of course. Xue Jianfeng was about to say that Lin Yi was obviously going to lose, but Lin Yi suddenly flashed and appeared in front of Ling Tianyu. Xue Jianfeng was speechless, and the others were also in an uproar. Lin Yi had been trapped for so long, and everyone thought that he was at his wits' end. Who would have thought that he would come out just like that? Was this guy teasing Ling Tianyu all the time? Everyone was dumbfounded, and Ling Tianyu, as the person involved, was so scared that he broke out in a cold sweat. The speed that Lin Yi showed before was frightening enough, but his speed was several times faster than before. It was hard to imagine such an amazing speed. But compared to this, there was something else that shocked Ling Tianyu even more. His 999 flying needles had surrounded Lin Yi tightly, with no openings or openings at all. How did Lin Yi get out unscathed? Before Ling Tianyu could make a further response, Lin Yi had lost the interest to continue playing with him. What greeted him was an unstoppable 1,000 legs of frenzy. After all, Lin Yi had almost tested Ling Tianyu's strength. Although Ling Tianyu had unlimited potential, he was still far from being able to make a name for himself. There was still a long way to go. Lin Yi's 1,000 legs of frenzy was extremely fast, and he appeared very abruptly, so it was even more difficult to guard against it. Even an expert in the early stage of Gold Core like Xianijie could not avoid it completely. However, Ling Tianyu took advantage of the situation and rolled on the ground, dodging the oncoming frenzy 1,000 kicks. Although he looked a little ragged, it was still enough to make Lin Yi look at him in a higher light. Even the people around him gasped in admiration. Chapter 5180. Stop! I admit defeat. Ling Tianyu shouted at the last moment. Only Lin Yi could retract his leg at this moment. If it was someone else, he would have kicked Ling Tianyu away. However, Lin Yi withdrew his leg effortlessly. He looked at Ling Tianyu meaningfully and thought to himself, this guy is really not easy to deal with. All geniuses were prideful. Even if a peerless genius like Ling Tianyu looked gentle and low-key on the surface, he was absolutely prideful in the bottom of his heart. This kind of person was usually very prideful. Even if they were forced into a desperate situation, it would be more difficult than ascending to the heavens to make them admit defeat. Unexpectedly, Ling Tianyu chose to admit defeat so decisively. Moreover, he was as calm as usual from the beginning to the end, without the slightest expression of shame or embarrassment. Just this temperament alone was already extremely remarkable. With extraordinary talent and profound shrewdness, even Lin Yi had to admit that Ling Tianyu would be a formidable figure in the future if he really grew up. Well, I hereby announce that Lin Yi wins. Xianijia announced on the spot. Everyone had not recovered from the shock until now. They were still immersed in the rhythm of the stalemate just now, but the winner was actually decided in the blink of an eye. This was too fucking sudden. Lin Yi looked indifferent. He turned around and was about to leave the arena. At this time, Ling Tianyu suddenly said behind him, "May I ask you a question?" "Speak." Lin Yi turned his head and looked at him. "How did you get rid of my flying needles just now?" Ling Tianyu asked. Logically speaking, his flying needles should have covered all 360 degrees without any blind spots, but Lin Yi was able to get out of it so easily, and he wasn't hurt at all. It was really confusing. In fact, he was not the only one who had this question. Everyone present also had this question. The only exception was Bing Wuqing. She was the only one who had seen Lin Yi's semi-primordial spirit state. Think about it yourself. Lin Yi smiled faintly. He was not stupid. The semi-primordial spirit state was his biggest trump card now. How could he reveal it to others so casually, especially in such a public place with so many eyes? Alright, then I'll seek your guidance next time. Ling Tianyu didn't continue pestering him. There was still a faint smile on his face, and he didn't look like a loser who had just admitted defeat. Although he had indeed lost, it was just an insignificant match after all. He still had a trump card that he hadn't used yet. After all, there was no need to use it unless it was absolutely necessary. Compared to his life-saving trump card, what was the big deal about admitting defeat and surrendering? Xue Jianfeng was speechless when he saw this scene. For him, the ideal situation for Lin Yi to fight against Ling Tianyu was for both sides to suffer. But now, both of them were completely unscathed. Ling Tianyu, this brat, admitted defeat just like that. Instead, he acted as if they appreciated each other's talents. It was truly a pain in the ass. After both of them returned to their respective teams, Xianijia continued to ask in a loud voice, "Who else wants to challenge a higher level?" This time no one made a sound. Even a supreme character like Ling Tianyu had lost. It could be seen how difficult it was to challenge someone of a higher level. This was tantamount to a heavy blow to their heads. They didn't dare to act rashly anymore. Challenging someone of a higher level was not a small matter. Not everyone would be as lenient as Lin Yi. What if they didn't have eyes and picked a ruthless person? What if the other party attacked ruthlessly or even killed you? There was no rule that no one could kill you in this competition. Of course, the silence was only temporary. There were many people who were ready to make a move. It was just that the rules had just been announced, and they hadn't found a suitable target to challenge yet. In another 2 days, when they were almost ready, those who had the strength and confidence to challenge someone of a higher level would really emerge. In that case, let's start drawing lots. Xianijia immediately arranged for each team to draw lots. Although it was a little complicated, there were less than 100 people in total. He could handle it all by himself. The first to start was the strongest team of Foundation Establishment Perfection, including Lin Yi and Xue Jianfeng. There were only 8 people in total. They were all core disciples of various primordial sects, and they were all leading senior brothers. The duel between them almost represented the competition of the strongest disciples of their respective sections. It could be said to be full of gimmicks and naturally attracted attention. After the results of the drawing lots were out, Xianijia took a look and smiled. He shook his head and sighed. It's a pity that the entire Primordial Alliance wasn't mobilized for this trial in the secular world. Only the Central Island Alliance and the North Island Alliance were gathered. Otherwise, we could really make a ranking of the strongest disciples of the Primordial Alliance. The 8 people drew lots for 4 teams. Although Lin Yi had just fought a fierce battle with Ling Tianyu, he didn't receive any special treatment. Of course, he could also choose to forfeit, but then he would only have 4 chances left. He had to win 3 out of 4 to qualify for the trial. It should be known that it was pure bad luck to be picked by someone to challenge someone of a higher level than him. If he lost, he would be eliminated. Even if he won, there would be no benefit. Not to mention that his true chi would be wasted. He would also have to participate in the competition of the same level. It couldn't be helped. The rules were cruel. They didn't ask for fairness, only survival of the fittest. After all, the trial competition was to prepare for the primordial trials, and there was no such thing as fairness in the primordial trials. Let alone this kind of battle, there was no such thing as fairness in the primordial trials. Xue Jianfeng rubbed his palms together. He wanted to take this opportunity to teach Lin Yi a good lesson. Although he had absolute confidence in his strength as an early-stage gold core expert, since Lin Yi had just been exhausted by Ling Tianyu, it would be a waste not to take advantage of this situation and save some energy. Unfortunately, the result of the draw didn't go his way. In the end, Xue Jianfeng didn't encounter Lin Yi. Instead, he encountered the leading senior brother of another primordial sect. He couldn't help but curse his bad luck. Fortunately, he still had 4 chances. Every time they drew a new lot, it was theoretically very easy for them to draw the same opponent. If it was a coincidence, it was possible for them to draw the same opponent 5 times. This was one of the special rules of this trial tournament. Not only was it a test of raw strength, but it was also a test of everyone's ability to adapt and recover. Any weakness in this aspect could become a fatal flaw. Of course, if luck wasn't on his side, this sort of rule could very well cause Xue Jianfeng to miss out on Lin Yi in this competition, and Xue Jianfeng would have to save his revenge for the primeval trials. Chapter 5181. At the same time, Xue Jianfeng's side was also like the autumn wind sweeping away the fallen leaves. After all, he had the foundation of the first person in the foundation establishment realm. Even if he didn't reveal the strength of the early stage of gold core, it was still easy for him to deal with ordinary experts in the peak of foundation establishment realm. With the 2 of them as the foundation, all the 4 matches of the disciples in the peak of foundation establishment realm ended very quickly. The total time spent was only half an hour, much faster than Xianijia had expected. After the peak of foundation establishment realm, the next match was between the disciples in the late stage of foundation establishment realm. Among them, the one who received the most attention was naturally Ling Tianyu, who had just failed in his cross-level challenge. Although his strength was unparalleled among those at the same level as him, he had just consumed a lot of genuine qi on Lin Yi. More importantly, his moves and routines were seen clearly by others. It was enough time for him to come up with a countermeasure. With all these disadvantages added together, he was no longer a strong enemy to be avoided in the eyes of others, but a ready-made soft persimmon, which made the other disciples in the late stage of foundation establishment realm restless. If they could defeat Ling Tianyu today, it would not be as simple as a victory for them. More importantly, it would be enough to make them famous and gain both fame and fortune. The benefits were self-evident. However, it turned out that Ling Tianyu was Ling Tianyu after all. As the young head of the Thousand Blades sect, he was definitely not someone that ordinary people could mess with. His defeat to Lin Yi only highlighted Lin Yi's strength, but absolutely did not mean that he was weak. At least in front of these experts at the same level as him, Ling Tianyu was invincible. So what if his moves and routines were seen clearly by others? Putting aside the fact that his flying blades of Thousand Blades was not so easy to crack, he didn't even need to use it to deal with these experts at the same level as him. He could casually launch 100 blades of Thousand Blades and no one could block it. Like Lin Yi and Xue Jianfeng, Ling Tianyu also easily finished the match in one move. In the face of his overwhelming strength, these disciples in the late stage of foundation establishment realm could only accept the fate of being crushed. As for becoming famous after one battle, they really thought too much. One match after another, the strength of the disciples decreased from high to low. Following that was the competition between disciples in the later stage of foundation building realm, the peak of the middle stage of foundation building realm, the middle stage of foundation building realm and the peak of the early stage of foundation building realm. Since Xianijia was the only judge and the space was limited, there could only be one duel at a time. Naturally, it would take a long time, but fortunately, the total number of people wasn't too high. As long as there were no accidents, the arrangement of one round every 2 days was already very lenient. Without Lin Yi, Xue Jianfeng, and Ling Tianyu, The rest of the duels were obviously much more boring. The only exception was a duel between foundation-building realm cultivators, in the later stages of the foundation-building realm. That was because there was also a hot topic in this duel, Ling Long. Thinking back, when she first came to the secular world, she was only in the early stage of foundation establishment. Ever since she got to know Lin Yi, her strength had risen rapidly. After taking a stroll outside, she was already in the middle stage of foundation establishment. Now, after a few months of hard cultivation on the Transfer Islands, her strength had skyrocketed to the late stage of foundation establishment. She was even only a step away from the peak of the late stage of foundation establishment. All in all, it had only been 10 months. She had advanced by leaps and bounds from the early stage of foundation establishment to the late stage of foundation establishment. Such a miracle might not be unparalleled in the ancient Jianghu, but it was definitely unprecedented. Moreover, Lung Lung wasn't someone without strength for nothing. Her crushed ice physique was 1 in a million. Once the advantage of it was truly developed, it would be no small matter. With Lung Lung's strength, it was naturally much easier for her to deal with an ordinary expert of the same level. It was just that she had yet to find a way to fully unleash the power of the crushed ice physique. Therefore, she wasn't as shocked as Lin Yi and the others. The whole process was without any surprises or danger. However, there was a little accident at the end. Lung Lung had a breakthrough on the spot. Although this was rare, it was not unheard of. During a duel, the state of one's essence, qi, and spirit would be elevated to the best. If one was already on the verge of a breakthrough, it wasn't strange for one to accidentally take advantage of the situation to break through. It was just that this would easily give the opponent an opportunity to take advantage of. That person had already been beaten up by Lung Lung to the point that he had no strength to fight back. If it wasn't for Lung Lung's mercy, he would have been beaten to the ground long ago. At this moment, when he saw an opportunity to fight back, he couldn't care less about etiquette and honor. He quickly waited for the opportunity to strike. Compared to being scolded for being shameless, it was more beneficial to get the victory in his hands. However, before he could make a move, he suddenly felt a chill on his back. An inexplicable vital energy actually entered his head in a single line. His entire person was instantly stunned. Until Lung Lung successfully broke through to the peak of the late stage of foundation establishment, he didn't dare to move an inch. He muttered and doubted everything, looking as if he had lost his soul. Everyone thought that he was frightened by Lung Lung's crushed ice physique. Little did they know that Lin Yi was the mastermind behind all this. Just like that, Lung Lung took the first victory without any mishaps. At the same time, she also stepped into the threshold of the late stage of foundation establishment. From the next round onwards, she would be competing with those late-stage foundation establishment disciples on the same stage. If luck was on her side, her next opponent might be Ling Tianyu. Without further ado, when all the teams above the early stage of foundation establishment had finished, an entire day had passed. Other than those disciples who were heavily injured and needed to rest quietly, the others had been waiting at the side the whole time. Although Xianijia didn't forbid them from moving freely, as long as it wasn't their turn to draw lots, they could totally go back and rest. However, no one was willing to give up this great opportunity to observe the other disciples. After all, they might be their future opponents. Only by knowing oneself and knowing the enemy could one gain the upper hand. Ling Shan and the others were observing as well, exchanging their opinions from time to time. Although they didn't have the intention to challenge those who were of a higher level than them, since the previous battles weren't against early-stage foundation establishment disciples, they wouldn't be their opponents in the future. At first glance, it seemed like they were doing useless work, and they might as well rest and build up their strength like the other early-stage foundation establishment disciples. However, to them, this day of observation was quite fruitful. In the past 3 days, they had already memorized what Lin Yi had taught them, and they had also practiced the countermoves that Lin Yi had come up with more than 100 times. However, that was just theory after all. It was hard to say if it would actually be of any use. Chapter 5182. Finally, Xianijia announced loudly, "Next, we'll begin drawing lots for the foundation establishment disciples. First match, Luo Shasheng of Snow Sword Sect against Lingshan of the Common World." With that, Xue Jianfeng's eyes lit up. He didn't have much of a relationship with Luo Shasheng, but he was still a disciple of the Snow Sword Sect. This was a great opportunity. Brother Luo, can I talk to you? Xue Jianfeng hooked his finger at Luo Shasheng. Xue Jianfeng was no longer a cripple. With his strength and status, there was naturally no one in the Snow Sword School who would disobey him. Luo Shasheng was immediately overwhelmed by the favor. He immediately followed Xue Jianfeng and said with a fawning expression, "What instructions does senior brother Xue have for me? How confident are you against this Lingshan?" Xue Jianfeng asked casually. 10. Luo Shasheng said confidently. He had already been an early-stage foundation establishment expert for more than 10 years. Even though he had not broken through, that was only because he did not have any medicinal pills. Among all the early-stage foundation establishment disciples in the Snow Sword School, he was one of the best. Right now he was only facing a newcomer who had just broken through and had an unstable foundation. Furthermore, it was a woman from the secular world. If he could still lose, he could go eat shit. That's good. This battle concerns the face of our Snow Sword sect, and we can't lose. But Xue Jianfeng looked at Lingshan from head to toe, killing intent flashing in his eyes. Luo Shasheng followed his gaze and looked over. He rolled his eyes and said, "I know. Don't worry, senior brother Xue. I will stop when the time is right. I will not be ruthless." Lingshan was, after all, a rare beauty, and he thought that Xue Jianfeng was eyeing her. "Wrong, I want you to do the exact opposite." Xue Jianfeng smiled coldly. He did think about Lingshan before, and not just her but the other beauties like Ziyu as well. If it weren't for Shirhan and Changyi staying in the common world, he'd even think about taking out Lin Yi's harem. But now wasn't the time to be obsessed with beauties. As long as he was strong enough, he could have as many beauties as he wanted. The most important thing right now was to attack Lin Yi. The exact opposite? What do you mean? Luo Shasheng was stunned. "Very simple, I want you to kill her," Xue Jianfeng said in a deep voice. "Kill?" Xiaosheng jumped in fright. His name was Xiaosheng and he'd killed quite a lot of people in the past, but facing a beauty like Lingshan, he really couldn't bring himself to do it. Plus, this was the tournament, and while killing wasn't prohibited, he wouldn't do it unless there was a huge grudge. "That's right. In the future, as long as it's Lin Yi's people, I'll reward them handsomely for every one of them I kill. Otherwise, it means that they are not giving me face." "Do as you see fit," Xue Jianfeng said with a cold snort. "All right, senior brother Xue, just wait and see." At this point, Luo Shasheng didn't hesitate at all. He was an early phase disciple, and if he offended Xue Jianfeng, he wouldn't be able to survive in the Snow Sword School anymore. Plus, swords had no eyes, and even if he accidentally killed someone in the tournament, he wouldn't have to take any responsibility. Xue Jianfeng was whispering to Luo Shasheng, thinking that he had lowered his voice very much, but he didn't expect Lin Yi's senses to be far above his, a master at the early stage of Golden Core, and he could hear everything clearly. Lin Yi immediately reminded Lingshan, "Be careful later. That guy listened to Xue Jianfeng, and he's ready to kill you. If you can't do it, just surrender. Don't risk it, safety first, understand?" "Don't worry, I know what I'm doing." Lingshan nodded, and under the cheers of the crowd, she walked into the ring with a calm expression, looking quite like a general. Lin Yi nodded to himself. Lingshan had been training in the department for years, and while her strength hadn't improved much due to the limitations of the environment, her temperament had matured quite a bit. From a certain perspective, this kind of change was even better than the improvement of her strength. Xi and Ijia gave the order, and the battle officially began. Lingshan didn't plan to attack first, since she was at an absolute disadvantage in terms of raw strength. Attacking first wouldn't give her the upper hand, and would instead expose an opening for the opponent to take advantage of. The best strategy for her was to defend and counterattack. Luo Shasheng smiled at the sight of Lingshan's posture. "If that's the case, then I won't hold back. This blade of mine is called the Life Killer Blade, and when it's drawn there will be blood. Good luck, miss." He was already looking down on Lingshan, and now he didn't care about her at all. He pulled his blade out of its sheath and slashed vertically. There didn't seem to be anything special about it at first glance, as if it was just a casual slash from someone underestimating their enemy. "You don't even use the snow sword arts and you think you can kill me just like that?" Lingshan frowned and chose to dodge. If it wasn't for Lin Yi's warning, she would have attacked already. She didn't take the bait? Luo Shashing also frowned. His strike was indeed ordinary. In the eyes of others it was purely relying on brute force, without the slightest bit of subtlety. Little did they know that this was just a camouflage on the surface. Luo Shashing looked like a big guy on the surface, but he was actually very shrewd. His attitude of underestimating his enemy was 30% real, but the other 70% was just for show. If Lingshan were to attack recklessly, she'd be falling right into his trap. His slash looked very crude, but it was actually a very dangerous move. With just a thought, he could turn it into one of the most dangerous moves of the Snow Sword School, the snow killing form. Lingshan still didn't know that she just walked right in front of death's door. If she really did fall into Luo Shashing's trap, she wouldn't be able to survive with her current strength. Unless Lin Yi forcefully interfered. She'd lose if that happened. She was completely oblivious to all of this, only following Lin Yi's instructions. She held back for a full 10 moves, and was forced back by Luo Shashing. She was in a dangerous situation, but fortunately her early phase strength wasn't just for show. Even if she couldn't win against Luo Shashing head-on, she could still hold on for a while if she focused on dodging. Heh, I don't know what kind of stupid move Lin Yi gave her. Letting Luo Shashing use the snow form so easily. Is there even a need to fight now? Xue Jianfeng mocked. Chapter 5183. This time, even Xianijia could only frown. He was a discerning man. He knew that the most dangerous thing when fighting with the disciples of the Snow Sword School was to be connected into the snow momentum by them. Therefore, he repeatedly told the disciples of the Blue Cloud sect in the North Island not to avoid the fight when fighting with the disciples of the Snow Sword School. Even if it was a little bit risky, they should try their best to get the first move. As long as they could make the opponents confused, the snow momentum would collapse by itself. It was a pity that he only said these words to the disciples of the Blue Cloud sect, and didn't dare to give Lingshan and the others pointers. Firstly, these people weren't real disciples of the Blue Cloud sect, and secondly, he had to give face to Lin Yi, his master. Not only would they not appreciate it, but they might even look down on him for no reason. But come to think of it, Xianijia was an experienced Golden Core practitioner from the Archaic Alliance. It wasn't surprising that he knew how to deal with the snow, but other people wouldn't know as much, especially people from the common world like Lingshan. She wouldn't know the inside story. The enemy was strong and she was weak. Retreating as soon as the fight started. Waiting for the enemy's momentum to pass before launching a counterattack. From Lingshan's point of view, this was quite a good strategy. But it was a pity that her opponent was Luo Shashing of the Snow Sword sect. There was a difference in strength between the two in the first place. And now that the snow had formed after 10 moves, the gap between them was even wider. Lingshan didn't have a chance to counterattack at all. She might have had a 10% chance of winning at the start, but now that the fight had dragged on, even that 10% chance of winning was gone. Why don't you just let her surrender, master? Where there's life, there's hope. Xianijia walked to Lin Yi's side and advised softly. Admitting defeat would only mean losing one round. There were still 4 chances left. As long as he worked hard, he might still have the chance to qualify for the trial. However, if he insisted on dragging it out, it wouldn't just be a matter of losing one round. He might even lose his life. Lin Yi smiled and shook his head. Don't underestimate Lingshan just because she's a weak girl. Her personality has always been strong. Unless she's willing, it's useless even if I say anything. This. Xianijia could only sigh helplessly and did not say anything else. After all, there were so many pairs of eyes staring at him. It was inappropriate for him to say too much under the watchful eyes of the public. Otherwise, he would be accused of favoritism. Xue Jianfeng smiled coldly as he looked at Lin Yi. In a battle between masters of the same level, Xue's force was unstoppable once it was formed. A casual move could easily kill someone, and it wouldn't leave any evidence behind. Just wait to collect this girl's corpse. As they were talking, the situation had changed. Lingshan was still able to barely dodge before. But now that Luo Shashing was using his snow form, every move he made was unstoppable. She couldn't keep dodging anymore, and dodging wasn't a long-term plan. It was already a miracle that she was able to keep dodging for so long with her strength. Haha, still trying to dodge at this point? You think you can? Luo Shashing laughed as he used the snow force to force 3 moves, forcing Lingshan into a corner. He couldn't wait to use his trump card, the snow kill stance. He was afraid that if he attacked too late, Lingshan would admit defeat and stop. He wouldn't be able to kill her then. As soon as he used the snow kill stance, a thick layer of invisible snow appeared on the blade, and the snow fell in all directions, covering Lingshan's entire body. Lingshan's movements slowed down by 60% in that instant. She was moving very fast before, but now it was as if she was moving in slow motion. The scene was very strange. The Snow Sword School's snow force is really strong. The Archaic Alliance disciples couldn't help but gasp. Snow force was the signature of the Snow Sword School, but it wasn't easy to form it in a real battle, especially at a lower level like Foundation establishment. Normal disciples had a hard time grasping the intricacies of snow force, and unless they had an overwhelming advantage, they wouldn't be able to see the power of snow force with their own eyes. Yeah, they all say that snow force accumulates to become something extraordinary, but I didn't expect it to have such a strong restraining effect. No wonder they say that you can't form a snow force, and that you're invincible when you form it. There weren't many martial skills that had a restraining effect. Normally, it would at most slow down a person's speed by 10 to 20%. Restraining a person's speed by more than 30% was already rare. It had to be known that a 30% effect was already very obvious, but this time it was a full 60%. In a situation like this, even a sky-class full mastery would be able to defeat Lingshan easily, let alone Luo Shixing, who had the upper hand. The moment he used the snow kill stance, his slaughter blade was practically at Lingshan's neck. Lingshan was already a dead person in his eyes. Heh. Too bad for such a beautiful girl. I wouldn't do something like this. But now that Xue Jianfeng wants you dead, you have no choice but to die. Luo Shixing sighed to himself. He didn't show any mercy at all, going straight for Lingshan's neck. The people around him paled as they watched. That blade would definitely take Lingshan's head. This Luo Shixing was really ruthless. Master, you're really not going to do anything? Even Xianijia, the leader of the team, couldn't help but feel his eyelids twitch. If it weren't for the fact that he had to remain neutral as a judge, even he would have stopped Lin Yi. No need. Lin Yi smiled faintly. Xue Jianfeng, who wasn't far away, frowned as he looked back and forth between Lin Yi and Lingshan. He couldn't help but pinch his chin in puzzlement. Was this guy really not worried about Lingshan's life at all? Or was he just putting on an act? Just when Xue Jianfeng was puzzled, the situation on the field suddenly changed. Lingshan, who everyone thought was definitely going to die, suddenly sped up at the last moment, narrowly dodging the fatal blade. So fast. Luo Shixing jumped in fright, and the people around him gasped as well. All of them were stunned by Lingshan's sudden burst of speed. Not good. Luo Shixing fell for it. Xue Jianfeng was, after all, a Golden Core practitioner, and the Snow Sword Sect's senior disciple. Chapter 5184. Lin Yi's lips curled up. Lingshan's acting skills were quite good, fooling everyone in front of everyone. Even Xue Jianfeng, who was a bystander, could barely react, let alone Luo Shixing, who was blinded by the whole situation. He was probably still in a daze right now. From the beginning to the end, this duel was a trap directed by Lin Yi and played by Lingshan. The Snow Sword School's most feared aspect was the snow force. Once the snow force was formed, it would be hard to block. Even Xianijia could easily see this, let alone Lin Yi, who had studied the Snow Sword School's practitioner's arts. Plus he had Lung Lung beside him. Even if he missed it, Lung Lung would still remind him. After knowing this, the most common strategy was naturally what Xianijia had thought, to break the snow force, and try his best to avoid the snow force. However, from Lin Yi's point of view, such a strategy could only be considered as normal, and it was far from being smart. With the difference in strength between Lingshan and Luo Shixing, how could she win if it was just normal? If Lingshan really went all out to break the snow force, she might be able to mess up Luo Shixing's formation and make it hard for him to form the snow force, but that would definitely expose a lot of flaws. She was already at a disadvantage in terms of strength, and if she exposed more flaws, then there would be no way for her to fight. So the strategy Lin Yi taught her this time was to show her weakness and let her opponent form the snow force, using this to magnify the underestimation hidden in her opponent's heart. When the opponent couldn't wait to release the snow force, it would mean that the opponent had underestimated her to the extreme, and that would be the perfect time to counterattack. Of course, it was far from enough to just rely on numbing her opponent's mentality. Lingshan had to purposely slow down her speed during this process, and that was why it was so difficult to dodge. Everything was just an act. As a result, Lingshan's speed was reduced by 30%, and when Luo Shaoxing used his snow force, it was reduced by another 30%. That was why the slow motion scene had happened. Luo Shaoxing had underestimated his opponent, and didn't even realize that she was acting. He thought that Lingshan was weak, and that she wouldn't even be able to withstand a single blow from his snow aspect. That was why he used his snow aspect, determined to take her life. The snow slaughter form was an extremely dangerous move. It was extremely powerful, but at the same time it would cause the user to reveal quite a few openings. As a result, unless there was a 90% chance of success, no disciple of the Snow Sword School would recklessly use this move. Even if they did use it, they would definitely be very careful, ready to withdraw and retreat at any time. Unfortunately, Luo Shaoxing thought it was absolutely safe, so he had already thrown all of this to the back of his mind. Lingshan had been waiting for this opening from start to finish, and it had finally come. One retreating, one advancing, Lingshan relied on the sudden burst of speed she'd been hiding, dodging the killer's blade that was coming at her. She even went one step further, closing the distance between her and the man, not giving him a chance to react as she elbowed him in the throat. Luo Shaoxing didn't even have the time to cry out in pain. The crowd was silent as they looked at the motionless Luo Shaoxing on the ground. This turn of events was simply too sudden, and they didn't even have time to react. It wasn't until Xianijia announced Lingshan's victory that the crowd looked at each other, all of them looking at Lingshan in disbelief. She was actually able to turn the tables with one move from her opponent's snow aspect. This woman really wasn't simple. How was it? Did I hit well? Lingshan ran over to Lin Yi's side to take credit. It's SOSO. Lin Yi smiled. Lingshan's sis-in-law is SOSO even though she's so strong? Boss, your standards are too high. Chen Tian and the others couldn't help but gasp. It was true that Lingshan wasn't very strong in terms of strength, but the way she controlled the rhythm of the battle was far beyond a normal person's level. It was a classic example of the weak defeating the strong. Is it high? I don't think so. It's not like she's challenging someone of a higher level. It's just fighting someone of the same level. It's something that should be expected, wouldn't it? Wouldn't all that preparation be for nothing? Lin Yi chuckled. Lingshan's execution was indeed strong, but from his point of view, there were quite a few areas where she hadn't handled things perfectly. She was still too inexperienced. Wow, Lin Yi bro, you can't always use your own standards to judge us. Look at those people, their mouths are wide enough to fit a duck egg. You can see how strong Lingshan sis was just now. Ziyu said with a frown. At least in the eyes of the outsiders, Lingshan's performance just now was absolutely stunning. Even Xianijia's eyes lit up. Luckily, Lingshan had just broken through, and didn't have enough experience. Otherwise, with the strength she displayed just now, she might even be able to challenge someone of a higher level. Lin Yi waved his hand with a smile before turning to Lingshan. That battle was a very valuable experience for you. So don't get too excited yet. Sit down and think about it, reflect on what you did right and what you didn't. That's the only way you'll be able to improve and get stronger the more you fight. Okay, don't worry. Lingshan nodded and went to meditate. While everyone was happy for Lingshan, Xue Jianfeng, on the other hand, was gritting his teeth in anger. As far as he was concerned, Luo Shaoxing dealing with Lingshan should have been a piece of cake. He didn't expect things to turn out this way. He really didn't know what to say. Trash. Xue Jianfeng spat harshly at Luo Shaoxing, who was dragged out of the crowd. Then he stared at Xianijia, who was hosting the second round. It was a pity that he didn't get to kill Lingshan, but he still had a chance later on. He wasn't disappointed at all. As expected, the second round had Lin Yi's people. This time it was Ying Ziyu. Xue Jianfeng was overjoyed. This girl looked much weaker than Lingshan, and even the weakest Foundation establishment disciple in the Archaic Alliance would be taken care of easily. With his connections and reputation in the Archaic Alliance, any Foundation establishment disciple wouldn't reject him if he gave them some benefits. Chapter 5185. Ziyu was a little nervous at first, but after realizing that it was Yu Bing, she was overjoyed. It became an internal sparring now, and it didn't matter who won or lost. In fact, Linny had told them about this a long time ago. After all, they didn't have many people, and once they drew lots, it would be easy for them to fight amongst themselves. Under these circumstances, they had to go through the motions and distribute the wins to the person who needed it the most. Just like right now, Yu Bing chose to admit defeat after going through the motions. Although he had just reached foundation level as well in terms of strength, Yu Bing was undoubtedly much stronger than Ziyu. With Lin Yi's special teaching, Yu Bing had enough confidence that he could get enough wins from the Archaic Alliance disciples. As long as his luck wasn't too bad, winning 3 out of 4 wasn't hard at all. Ziyu, on the other hand, was different. It wasn't easy for her to win from someone else, especially with Xue Jianfeng watching from the sidelines. It was even harder for her to get into the archaic trials, and so Yu Bing gave the win to her. Thanks, Yu Bing bro. Ziyu was all smiles after getting off the stage. She couldn't wait to get one of them every time. She didn't need many, just 2 more would do. That way, she'd be able to get into the archaic trials. Linny and the others looked at each other and smiled. To be honest, they had the same thought as well. Even after all the preparation they had, they still didn't want Ziyu and the girls to take the risk. It was a pity that things like drawing lots could only be left to the heavens. Otherwise, Xi and Ijia wouldn't be able to answer to the higher-ups if they did something, especially with so many people watching from the sidelines. I object. Xue Jianfeng shouted suddenly. Everyone instantly quietened down, and their gazes converged onto him in unison. They looked at each other and didn't understand what was going on. What are you objecting to? Xi and Ijia frowned. I'm protesting that they're rigging the match. That Yu Bing was clearly going easy on Ziyu just now, just casually dealing with her and ending the fight. Even an idiot could see that. Are you going to say you can't see it, Uncle Xian? Xue Jianfeng humphed coldly. Everyone turned to look at Xi and Ijia. Xi and Ijia nodded calmly and admitted, that's right. I can see it. Since you can see that they are faking it, you, as the martial uncle leading the team and the referee, actually don't care about it. Instead, you allow it. Martial Uncle Xian, aren't you being too biased by doing this? Are you looking down on our ancient alliance's rules too much? Xue Jianfeng took advantage of the situation and said overbearingly. However, Xi and Ijia didn't panic at all. Instead, he looked at him with a faint smile and said, please forgive me for being ignorant. Why don't you tell me, Xue Jianfeng? Which rule in the Archaic Alliance states that one can't show mercy during a competition? This. Xue Jianfeng originally thought he had something on his opponent, but he was left speechless. If they were fighting against friends or family, then it was only natural for them to be lenient. The Archaic Alliance truly didn't have such a rule. This old man has always treated everyone equally. If you show mercy to others, or if you ask others to show mercy to you, then you'll have to pay the price. I won't stop it either. Any other questions? Xi and Ijia said faintly. Xue Jianfeng humphed coldly, speechless. He looked at Lin Yi's group hatefully, waiting for the lot drawing to begin. Lin Yi's group didn't participate in the next 2 matches, but in the 5th match it was finally Wu Chantian's turn. His opponent was Feng Pingxiu of the Righteous Sect. Xue Jianfeng wasn't familiar with Feng Pingxiu, but the Righteous Sect was also a small sect in the Zhongdao Alliance. They had a good relationship with the Snowsword sect, so Xue Jianfeng's words had some influence. Feng Pingxiu agreed to Xue Jianfeng's request without hesitation. However, what shocked everyone was that Feng Pingxiu, who was supposed to have the upper hand in terms of strength, was beaten up by Chen Tian's series of quick attacks. From start to finish, he didn't even have a chance to fight back, and was forcefully taken down by Chen Tian's series of attacks. This guy's so strong. Everyone was speechless. From the looks of it, they thought that Chen Tian was much stronger than Feng Pingxiu, but they didn't know that it was all thanks to Lin Yi's teachings. The Righteous Sect's arts and techniques were all about advancing step by step, and this style was very stable. As long as one had the upper hand in terms of strength, they wouldn't be defeated under normal circumstances. But in Lin Yi's eyes there was a huge drawback. It was too slow. Because of this, it was hard for the Righteous Sect disciples to use their full strength at the start, especially the first 3 moves. They could only use 70% of their strength, and under such circumstances they wouldn't have much of an advantage. After all, if they could finish off their opponent in 3 moves, it wouldn't be a fight between the same level anymore. But Chen Tian wasn't a normal opponent. He had the counter techniques that Lin Yi had taught him, and it was just right for him to take down Feng Pingxiu. It was like a father beating his son. After the first 3 moves, Feng Pingxiu was already showing signs of losing, and in his panic, he couldn't use his strength. It wasn't strange at all for him to be taken down by Chen Tian. Trash! Trash! Xue Jianfeng gritted his teeth once more. Luo Shaxing might have been defeated by Lingshan at the last moment, but at least it gave him hope. This Feng Pingxiu, on the other hand, was just a useless piece of trash. Fortunately, there was still a chance. That was the only thing Xue Jianfeng could do to comfort himself, but what hurt him the most was that Lin Yi's group either went up against their own people, or they got the last laugh like Lingshan and Wu Chuntian. All the disciples of the ancient sects lost to them one by one, and a few of them were even turned around by Lin Yi as if they had the help of the gods. It was like seeing a ghost in the flesh. Of course, Lin Yi's group didn't win completely. Fatty Lai and Kong Xiaobo lost, but these two were very cunning. The moment they saw that the counter techniques Lin Yi taught them didn't work on their opponents, they didn't even bother fighting and just surrendered, not giving anyone a chance to do anything to them. When everyone was done fighting, Xue Jianfeng was so depressed that he wanted to spit out blood. He wanted to go up himself, but he was a foundation building perfected in name. Unless the people dared to challenge him, they wouldn't have the chance to do so. Chapter 5186. Xue Jianfeng couldn't help but feel a headache. This isn't right. I don't know what Lin Yi's group is up to, but they're all acting like they've taken the wrong medicine. Normal people really can't handle them. What should I do? He couldn't help but feel a headache. He'd promised the glasses doctor that he would be able to handle this. What if he messed things up and the glasses doctor cancelled his priority training right away? Just when Xue Jianfeng was at his wit's end, another disciple of the Snow Sword School went up. Just like Luo Shaxing, he was forced into a snow form, and his opponent couldn't fight back at all. He was easily defeated in one move. This was the most normal result. If everyone was like Lingshan, turning defeat into victory in one move, then it would be a problem. At the thought, Xue Jianfeng had a flash of inspiration. He looked at Lin Yi and Cold, who were chatting and laughing not far away. He understood immediately. The competition continued. After the early phase of Foundation was the battle between Sky Class Full Mastery. If one wasn't even at Sky Class Full Mastery, then they wouldn't have the right to participate in the competition. It would be a waste of time. There were only 2 short months left. If one was still at Sky Class Late Phase Peak or even lower, then there was no way they could succeed in the next 2 months. They were destined to be eliminated, and naturally there was no need for them to participate in this competition. When the first round was over, it was already the second evening. Everyone went back to rest for the night, and after the third day, the second round of the competition would begin. According to the usual practice, the first round was to challenge someone of a higher level. The others had been watching the first round, and only Ling Tianyu had stepped up to challenge Lin Yi. He'd tasted defeat for the first time in his life. Now in the second round, after 2 days of deliberation, and with the fact that the first round had shown everyone's strength, it was enough for everyone to use as a reference. Sure enough, there were a lot more people who chose to challenge those who were of a higher level than them. In total, there were as many as 7 people. Among them, the most eye-catching was Ling Tianyu. Although this young master of the Thousand Blades sect had been defeated by Lin Yi last time, there was no doubt about his strength. Apart from Lin Yi, no one else was a match for him. Facts had proven that even if Ling Tianyu was not the most invincible person in the Foundation establishment stage, he was definitely one of the best. The expert in the great circle of the Foundation establishment stage that he was fighting against was not weak, but he was easily killed in a single move without being able to fight back. Just like that, Ling Tianyu became the first disciple to qualify for the primeval trials, while the disciple in the great circle of Foundation establishment realm, whom he defeated, became the first unlucky guy to be eliminated. Looking at that person's dazed look, many people felt sad for a moment. A dignified disciple in the great circle of Foundation establishment realm was eliminated just like that. It really made people sigh and speechless. In terms of strength, this person was not weak among the experts in the great circle of Foundation establishment realm. If he had not encountered Ling Tianyu, he actually had a great chance to win 3 rounds against other experts of the same level. Of course, the premise was that his luck was not too bad. Unfortunately, there were no ifs in this world. His luck was not just bad, it was simply bad luck. Under such cruel rules, it was impossible for him not to be eliminated. Even if he wanted to blame someone, he could only blame himself for being targeted by Ling Tianyu. Brother Tianyu, as far as I know, you are not someone who easily admits defeat. Why didn't you continue to challenge Lin Yi today, but chose such a soft persimmon instead? Xue Jianfeng suddenly came over and asked with a strange and sarcastic smile on his face. As soon as his words came out, everyone around looked over. Even Xianijia couldn't help but listen attentively out of curiosity. For this reason, he even deliberately postponed the next cross-level battle. Ling Tianyu glanced around the crowd, and when his eyes swept past Lin Yi, he nodded slightly without any embarrassment. Then he said lightly, "Brother Xue, you are wrong. Tianyu respects every opponent. In Tianyu's eyes, Brother Zhan is a real opponent, not a soft persimmon." This Brother Zhan was Zhan Shixiang, the disciple in the Great Circle of Foundation Establishment realm, whom he had just defeated with one move. Although Ling Tianyu's expression was very sincere, everyone felt that it was just a formality. Zhan Shixiang was a strong opponent for others, but for a genius like Ling Tianyu, it was not an exaggeration to say that Zhan Shixiang was a soft persimmon. Even Zhan Shixiang himself thought so. Sure enough, he was a hypocrite. Xue Jianfeng cursed in his heart, but remained calm on the surface. He said with a faint smile, "Brother Tianyu seems to have not answered my question, because I am no match for Brother Lin. It's as simple as that." Ling Tianyu didn't hide his answer at all. The outcome of the battle the day before yesterday had already been decided. At least for now, he wasn't Lin Yi's opponent. Even if he had the pride of being the young master of the Thousand Blades sect, he wouldn't lie to himself about this kind of thing. "Really? Then why don't you challenge me? I have been waiting for you for a long time." Xue Jianfeng's words surprised everyone. Everyone immediately looked at each other. Xue Jianfeng and Ling Tianyu were both like kings in the Foundation Establishment realm. Unfortunately, they had never had the opportunity to fight each other head-on. Therefore, the strength of the two had always been one of the hottest topics in the market. However, Ling Tianyu did not choose Xue Jianfeng for 2 cross-level challenges in a row, which made everyone very disappointed. Unexpectedly, Xue Jianfeng actually provoked him in public at this time. Did he want to fight with Ling Tianyu? Is it necessary? Ling Tianyu glanced at him with a faint smile. Everyone couldn't help but burst into an uproar. Ling Tianyu's answer seemed to be casual and ordinary, but there was indescribable self-confidence and contempt in it. It seemed that in his eyes, Xue Jianfeng was not in existence on the same level as him, and there was no need to deliberately defeat him. Ha 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 ha. Xue Jianfeng looked up to the sky and laughed until he was out of breath. After a long while, he suddenly said, "That's right, there is indeed no need." As he said this, he had already officially added Ling Tianyu's name to his must-kill list. Although the 1,000 blades flying together was a little tricky, Ling Tianyu was still an expert at the peak of the late stage of Foundation Establishment realm, while he was at the early stage of Gold Core realm. It was obvious who was stronger and who was weaker. Ling Tianyu smiled indifferently and didn't continue to pay attention to him. He also didn't have any interest in watching other people's battles, so he chose to turn around and leave. Chapter 5187. This was the cruelty of challenging someone of a higher level. It was extremely difficult and dangerous. With Zhan Shixiang as an example, everyone who was challenged would definitely go all out. Whenever there was a chance, they would strike ruthlessly to establish their might, killing the chicken to warn the monkey. Only in this way could others fear them and stay far away, no longer daring to challenge them of a higher level. When the 7 cross-level duels were over, Xianijia was about to announce the start of the second round of regular duels. At this moment, Xue Jianfeng stood up and said loudly, "I'm sorry, Junior Uncle Xan. There's something that I have to tell everyone. Otherwise, some people will play us in the palm of their hands with dirty and despicable means. They think that no one knows about it." "What are you trying to say?" Xianijia humphed coldly, trying his best to control his temper. His impression of Xue Jianfeng was extremely bad. If it wasn't for everyone's eyes, he wouldn't be so polite. "What I'm trying to say is that our Snow Sword School sent out a traitor, and because of this traitor, our Snow Sword School's disciples lost a battle that they shouldn't have lost." Xue Jianfeng pointed at one person. It was Lung Lung. Lung Lung suddenly became the center of attention. She didn't know what to do. Fortunately, Linny was standing next to her. One look from him calmed her down and she retorted. First, I'm not a traitor. The Snow Sword School never announced that I'm a traitor. Second, I don't know what you're talking about. What does the Snow Sword School's disciple losing the battle have to do with me? Xue Jianfeng laughed coldly and pointed at Luo Shasheng. Alright, then why don't you tell everyone with Luo Shasheng's strength, how could he be defeated by Lingshan in one move when he had already formed a snow form? Of course it's because Lingshan had a better grasp of the rhythm, and Luo Shasheng underestimated his opponent. What's so strange about losing the battle? Lung Lung said disapprovingly. That's right, everyone can see that. It's a perfect example of the weak defeating the strong. There's nothing to doubt, Xianijia added. I don't think so. Lingshan's grasp of the rhythm was ingenious, and Luo Shasheng did underestimate his opponent. But if it's just based on these 2 points, she would at most be able to find a flaw in his counterattack. Why don't you guys put yourselves in her shoes and think about it? If you guys had the opportunity to counterattack, would you be able to turn defeat into victory in one move? Xue Jianfeng asked. Everyone paused for a moment, shaking their heads in unison. Luo Shasheng had used his snow force, and that powerful restriction effect was real. Even if he revealed an opening, it would still be extremely hard to defeat him in one move. After all, Lingshan was just a newbie in the common world who just reached foundation level. Xianijia frowned. Although he didn't want to agree, what Xue Jianfeng said did make some sense. Recalling the scene of Lingshan turning the tables, even he felt that it was a little unbelievable. So, I think it's necessary to ask again. Why was Lingshan able to defeat Luo Shasheng in one move under that situation? Xue Jianfeng didn't need Lung Lung's answer, because he had his own. He pointed at Lung Lung and said, There's only one reason. We Xuejian sent out a traitor. A traitor who revealed our sex arts to the enemy. Linny couldn't help but laugh when he heard this. Xue Jianfeng was really shameless. He had already become a lackey of the center, but he could still say that Lung Lung was a traitor in public. What a weirdo. What proof do you have? Xianijia said in a low voice. At this point he had to continue the conversation. Otherwise, it would be his dereliction of duty as the leader of the team. However, it was impossible for him to follow Xue Jianfeng's wishes. Unless Xue Jianfeng could present solid evidence, otherwise, it would just be a groundless speculation. Lingshan's attack that turned the tables just so happened to hit the life gate of Snow Murder form. Because of that, she was able to kill Luo Shasheng in one move. It can't be a coincidence, can it? Xue Jianfeng smiled coldly. Every sect had different mental cultivation methods, and the way to circulate their Zhenqi was also different. Every move and every style had a completely different emphasis, so the vital point of every move was very different. For example, when using the snow killing style, when using this move, the throat was the most crucial point of the vital point of the Zhenqi circulation. As long as the throat was hit, even if the opponent was weak, it would be easy to defeat the opponent in one move. Xianijia could only look at Lin Yi, hoping that Lin Yi could stand out and refute it himself. After all, what Xue Jianfeng said did make sense. It would be too far-fetched to say that Lingshan's last move that went straight for Luo Shasheng's throat was a coincidence. You have nothing to say now, right? If it wasn't for Lung Lung, if it wasn't for the traitor, if it wasn't for her revealing our sex arts and the life gate of Snow Sword School, how could Lingshan win against Luo Shasheng with her insignificant strength? So now the evidence is irrefutable. Lung Lung is the traitor, and Lingshan relied on her to turn the tables. Xue Jianfeng struck the iron while it was hot and made the final decision. This time, everyone's gaze is towards Lung Lung, and Lingshan turned unfriendly. Although this matter didn't seem to have anything to do with them, it affected the fairness of the competition. If Xianijia still wanted to cover up for them, he'd be the target of everyone's wrath. Hold on. Lingshan's technique is indeed a perfect counter to your Snow Sword School. However, aren't you being a little too unscrupulous if you're trying to blame Lung Lung with just a few one-sided and arbitrary words? Or is it that Xue Jianfeng, your IQ is so low that you can't think of any other possibilities? Lin Yi smiled calmly. What did you say? Xue Jianfeng froze and raged. The evidence is irrefutable, and you're still trying to deny it. You still have the cheek to say that the evidence is irrefutable? Linny snorted and said calmly, "If that's the case, then I'd like to ask for your advice. Yesterday, during the early phase of foundation building, it wasn't just your snow sword school that was countered. The other righteous sects and whatnot were also countered by us. How are you going to explain this? You're not going to say that all the primeval sects have traitors and revealed their arts to us beforehand, are you?" Chapter 5188. After a while, Xue Jianfeng tried his best to explain. "That's different. The other sects are only suppressing it on the surface. Even if they don't know the practitioner's arts and the styles Mingmen, it's not hard as long as they use the right strategy. But Luo Shaxing is different. His styles Mingmen has been locked on, so there's no doubt about it." "Is that so? Then according to what you're saying, as long as we can lock on the styles Mingmen, it must be someone who snitched on us?" Linny smiled faintly. "Of course, if it's not someone snitching on us, do you think it's just luck?" Xue Jianfeng humphed coldly. Linny glanced at the other people's expressions. Seeing that they were still skeptical, he said, "Then what if I can lock on the opponent's Mingmen with ease later? What do you say?" "How is that possible?" Xue Jianfeng snorted disdainfully. Even if Lin Yi's strength was much higher than his opponent's, the most he could do was win with brute force. It was impossible for him to lock onto his opponent's moves, unless he knew his opponent's arts and all their moves like the back of his hand. Plus, the drawing hadn't even started yet. They didn't even know who their opponent was. Lin Yi's words were bullshit to Xue Jianfeng. "All right, then open your eyes wide and watch. We'll talk after you're done," Lin Yi smiled faintly. "All right. But let me say this first. If you can't lock on the opponent's Mingmen later, it'll be a confession. I suggest disqualifying Leng Leng and Ling Shan. Uncle Xian, that's not too much, is it?" Xue Jianfeng said immediately. Xian and Lin Yi looked at each other. Seeing how calm Lin Yi was, he nodded in front of the crowd. After all, if Leng Leng revealed the Snow Sword School's practitioner's arts to others, it would be too bad of an influence. They could only be disqualified as a warning to others. "All right, let's start then," Lin Yi said casually. "All right." Xian immediately began to preside over the drawing of lots for the Foundation Establishment Great Perfection disciples. Including Lin Yi and Xue Jianfeng, there were originally 8 Foundation Establishment Great Perfection disciples. However, because of Ling Tianyou's successful cross-level challenge and Zhang Xixiang's early elimination, there were only 7 left. This wasn't easy to arrange, but it wasn't completely unsolvable. They just had to draw the missing disciples and make them priority for the next round. If they didn't get enough matches because of this, they could just make up for it in the future. The results came out very quickly, and Lin Yi's opponent this time was the only female of the entire group of perfected foundations, Duanmuyu, the senior sister leading the group from Leafling. Although she was a girl, Duanmuyu's every move was valiant and quite masculine. Both her dressing and temperament were very masculine. She was a maverick woman. The corner of Xue Jianfeng's lips curled up when he saw this. Lin Yi had sworn that he could easily lock onto any opponent's Mingmen. But this Yiling sect was one of the most mysterious sects in the Archaic Alliance. Their movements were like ghosts, and their moves were extraordinary. Even Xue Jianfeng didn't know much about them. He couldn't even name their moves, let alone Mingmen. Lin Yi's bet was a lost one, given that he'd picked an opponent like this. "Please." Lin Yi walked into the field slowly and made a gesture to Duanmuyu. Duanmuyu nodded slightly and didn't say anything. She moved her feet and dashed towards Lin Yi. Her movement was very strange. Like a falling leaf in the wind, she drifted from left to right, but her speed wasn't slow at all. In the blink of an eye, she was in front of Lin Yi. Duanmuyu's movement is quite the essence of Yiling sect. Although she's not as amazing as Ling Tianyu, she's a rare outstanding figure among the disciples of the same generation in the Archaic Alliance. Xian couldn't help but sigh. Although Foundation Establishment disciples weren't the decisive power of the Archaic Alliance, they still represented the future of each sect. A strong Foundation Establishment disciple meant that the sect had a strong foundation and a bright future. On the other hand, if the Foundation Establishment disciples weren't strong enough, then the future of the sect would be bleak. In the entire archaic underworld, the Thousand Blades sect had the amazing Ling Tianyu, the Snow Sword sect had the powerful Xue Jianfeng, and even Yiling sect had the outstanding Duanmuyu. They were all the reserve forces of the Middle Island Alliance. On the contrary, the North Island Alliance was mediocre. It had been a long time since they had such a talented disciple. At this rate, after 100 years, when these people grew up one by one, it would be difficult for the North Island Alliance to maintain its status as an equal with the Middle Island Alliance. Xianijia was worried, but the situation on the field had changed in an instant. Duanmuyu's movement was unpredictable, and her opponent in the last round had suffered from it. But this time her opponent was Lin Yi. After years of continuous improvement, the butterfly microstep's unpredictable movement was not inferior to Yiling's movement at all. In terms of speed, Duanmuyu's movement was far faster than hers. Duanmuyu originally wanted to seize the initiative with Yiling's movement, but before she could lock on to Lin Yi suddenly blocked the position behind her. The difference in movement was obvious. The eyes of the spectators brightened. As expected of a powerful figure who could suppress Ling Tianyu to the point of being helpless. Duanmuyu's strength was not weak, but it was not enough in front of Lin Yi. However, Xue Jianfeng still had a calm and confident smile on his face. Of course he knew that Lin Yi was much stronger than Duanmuyu, but so what? The bet between him and Lin Yi was not about who would win or lose, but whether Lin Yi could lock on to Duanmuyu's movement. This was more than 1,000 times more difficult than winning or losing. Unless Lin Yi knew the mental cultivation method and movement of Yiling sect like the back of his hand, it was as difficult as ascending to heaven to achieve this. You are really strong, but it won't be so easy to defeat me. Duanmuyu glanced at Lin Yi, who was behind her. She knew that Yiling wouldn't be able to shake him off. Moreover, her chances of winning weren't high in the first place. If she kept dodging, she wouldn't stand a chance at all. As soon as she finished speaking, Duanmuyu opened her palm, and a withered leaf slowly fell. Chapter 5189. One falling leaf tells the world of autumn. Yiling sect's moves are always so unpredictable, Xianijia said. Xianijia sighed. This move, falling leaves in autumn, could be considered as one of the few representative moves of the Yiling sect. It was not because it was the most powerful move, but it was simply because it was the most well-known move. Everyone nodded in agreement. Although Leaf Spirit sect was not the strongest primordial sect, it was definitely one of the most unfathomable primordial sects. Furthermore, it had firmly occupied the position of one of the 10 minor primordial sects and clans since a long time ago. Its strength was not to be underestimated. It was just that Leaf Spirit sect kept a low profile, giving off a feeling that it was not as eye-catching as Snow Sword sect. She can actually hide herself with just the intent alone with no flaws at all. This Duanmuyu is so strong. Ziyu's eyes lit up. The others felt the same. Lin Yi had explained the arts and moves of Yiling sect to them before, but they didn't understand at all. After all, Yiling sect was too different from the other sections. Their moves were all about intent, and unless they could experience it themselves, they wouldn't be able to understand it no matter how much Lin Yi taught them. But now that they saw it with their own eyes, they had a direct understanding of the so-called intent of Yiling sect. At the same time, they couldn't help but feel lucky that they didn't meet any Yiling disciples in the first round, or they wouldn't be able to use the counter moves that Lin Yi taught them. Actually, this wasn't strange at all. The Leaf Spirit sect was unfathomable. Due to the extremely unique aptitude requirements, there weren't many disciples in the sect. There were only 4 disciples participating in the secular world this time, and only one of them was at the early stage of foundation establishment. The chances of them drawing lots to meet each other weren't high. Yeah, her Yiling technique is already strong enough, and with this move it's perfect. We can't even see where she is with the naked eye, let alone fight back. Lingshan frowned. Luckily, her opponent is Lin Yi boss. If it were us, we'd just be sitting ducks, Qintian said happily. You guys are thinking too much. Duanmuyu is a perfected foundation establishment expert. What does that have to do with us? The ones we've met are at most early stage of foundation establishment realm. Even if they're Yiling disciples, they wouldn't be able to practice Leaves Knows the Autumn to this degree, would they? Yubing couldn't help but laugh. You're right. Everyone looked at each other and smiled. While everyone was talking, Duanmuyu, who had concealed herself with the help of the falling leaves of autumn, was finally about to make a move. After all, this wasn't an invisibility technique. Once her opponent had completely adapted to this state, He would naturally be able to easily discover her traces. She had to finish the battle before that happened. Otherwise, all her efforts would be in vain. However, before she could really make a move, Linny suddenly chopped diagonally in front of him without warning. At the same time, he said indifferently, "Let's stop here." Everyone outside the arena was baffled. After a moment, they came to a realization and were all amazed. It turned out that Duanmu had never left from the beginning to the end. She had indeed used the falling leaves of autumn to become one with her surroundings, but she did not make any unnecessary movements at all. She just stayed quietly in place, waiting for the best opportunity to attack. One had to admit that this was a very smart choice. It was better to stay put than to move. This way, not only could she minimize her flaws, but she could also use Leaves Knows the Autumn state to make her opponent even more confused. After discovering that she had disappeared, a normal person's first reaction wouldn't be to think that she was still in the same place. They would subconsciously exclude this option. Unfortunately, her opponent was Lin Yi. Even if Leaves Knows the Autumn state could fool everyone present, it couldn't fool Lin Yi's consciousness, which was far above theirs. Duanmu was startled on the spot. She couldn't help but smile bitterly and helplessly say, as expected of someone who can defeat Ling Tianyu, "I lost." This result was far beyond everyone's expectations. They all thought that even if Lin Yi could win, he would at least have to go through a fierce battle like the day before yesterday against Ling Tianyu. They didn't expect that it would end so quickly. The two of them hadn't even exchanged any physical blows before the duel was over. Lin Yi nodded and turned to Xue Jianfeng. "What else do you have to say now? What do you have to say? Is there something wrong with your brain? You only won against Duanmu, and you didn't lock on to her move Mingmen. How dare you be so proud in front of me?" Xue Jianfeng sneered. "Is that so?" Lin Yi asked with a smile that didn't seem like a smile. Even now, one of his hands was still in a knife hand position, pointing precisely at Duanmu's waist. "You're wrong. Although I'm very curious how he knew, what he pointed at was indeed my move Mingmen," Duanmu suddenly said. If Lin Yi hadn't pointed at her move Mingmen, she wouldn't have admitted defeat on the spot. At the very least, she would have fought for a while longer. Lin Yi was a little surprised to hear this. Although the move Mingmen was not a core secret, it was still a very secretive thing for each sect. Otherwise, if it was made known to everyone, it would be very easy for outsiders to counter it. Of course, the move Mingmen had always been the most important thing that everyone focused on protecting. Even if one knew where it was very difficult to attack it. It was just like knowing which parts of a person's body were fatal. You couldn't hit them wherever you wanted. You had to have the strength to do so first. "What did you say?" Xue Jianfeng's expression immediately froze. He didn't expect Duanmu to admit it in public. He hurriedly said, "Duanmu, did you receive a bribe from him? That's why you're deliberately putting on a show in front of us?" Everyone looked at each other. Although such suspicion was a little biased, Duanmu had indeed admitted it a little too straightforwardly. No wonder people speculated that it was a conspiracy. The move Mingmen isn't a secret that no one knows about. As long as it's someone in the upper echelons of the Archaic Alliance with some qualifications, I believe it shouldn't be difficult for them to know. Moreover, when has my Yiling sect ever done things so vile? Duanmu said indifferently. Chapter 5190. Humph. One's position determines one's position. Lin Yi is also a member of your Blue Cloud sect. Uncle Master Xian must be biased, so your words may not be trustworthy, Xue Jianfeng argued. Preposterous. How dare you doubt me? Xianijia was furious. Xue Jianfeng was obviously provoking him. If it weren't for his identity as the leading Uncle Master, he would have taught him a lesson. At this time, Bing Wuqing suddenly said, "I've also heard that the weakness of the falling leaves is indeed at the waist." Fuck. Xue Jianfeng almost spat out a mouthful of blood. He could twist words and force logic on Xianijia, but he couldn't possibly insist that Bing Wuqing's words were untrustworthy. After all, Bing Wuqing was on his side. Looking at Bing Wuqing's expressionless face, Xue Jianfeng wanted nothing more than to fall out with her on the spot. It was a pity that he did not have the strength nor the confidence to do so. After all, in terms of status, Bing Wuqing was above him in both the Snow Sword faction and the center. So, he could only shut his mouth resentfully. Now you have nothing to say, right? Linny smiled faintly. Xue Jianfeng was speechless for a while. Since things had come to this, it was useless to say anything else. He could only snort to show his silent agreement. Hey, when are you going to put your hand down? Duan Muyu suddenly snorted. Only then did Linny realize that his hand was still on Duan Muyu's waist. She might have the aura of a man, but she was still a girl, and a pretty one at that. He quickly pulled his hand back and smiled apologetically. I'm sorry. Other girls would be shy in this situation, but Duan Muyu didn't seem to care at all. Instead, she asked curiously, how do you know the weakness of the falling leaves? It wasn't strange that Lin Yi and the others knew the weakness of the Snow Sword sect. After all, there was Lung Lung. But now, even the Leaf Spirit sect knew it like the back of his hand. This was a little unbelievable. After all, Lin Yi was from the secular world. It's not strange. He's the granduncle of our Green Cloud sect in the North Island. It's normal for him to know about the situation of all the primordial sections. Xianijia explained. Really? Duan Muyu looked at Lin Yi doubtfully and did not say anything more. After this small disturbance, the grand competition continued. Xue Jianfeng, who had just been given the cold shoulder by Lin Yi, immediately displayed his prowess in the competition, beating his opponent to the brink of death with a single move. Clearly, he was using his opponent as a punching bag. Thus, one more great perfection heaven-ranked disciple was seriously injured and eliminated, leaving only 6 people. But this was within expectations. As the competition progressed, this kind of situation would only increase. Soon after the Great Perfection Foundation Establishment Realm disciples, it was the Peak Late Foundation Establishment Realm disciples. Although the most interesting representative, Ling Tianyu, had obtained the trial qualification in advance, there were still many highlights in this group. Among them, the most eye-catching was Lung Lung, who made a breakthrough in the middle of the last round. Coincidentally, Lung Lung's opponent this time was Liangzhu, a disciple of the Green Cloud sect in the North Island. Although he was not the leading senior brother because of Xianijia, he was the strongest among all the Green Cloud sect disciples in the North Island. Looking at Liangzhu, who stood opposite of Lung Lung, Xianijia could not help but shake his head. Even if the leading senior brother was not a genius disciple, most of them were Great Perfection Foundation Establishment Realm experts. Unlike the one from the Green Cloud sect in the North Island, he looked ordinary and inconspicuous even in the Peak Late Foundation Establishment Realm group. How embarrassing. I hope this guy won't embarrass the Green Cloud sect in the North Island. Xianijia secretly smiled bitterly. Although Liangzhu won the last round, he only won by a narrow margin against an opponent whose strength was at the bottom. The result was really unsatisfactory. He was the number 1 disciple of the Green Cloud sect in the North Island. If he could not win 3 rounds in the end and was eliminated, it would be really embarrassing. Even Xianijia, the leading senior brother, would feel ashamed. Especially now, even though it was only the 2nd round, his opponent was Kult, who had just broken through to the next level. Her strength was still far from being consolidated. Logically speaking, he should be able to take her down easily. If he still lost, not only would he be a laughingstock, his future would also be worrying. Please. Liangzhu's expression was very dignified. In the eyes of others, this was just an ordinary duel. The most special thing was Lung Lung. Very few people could feel the huge pressure on him. Even Xianijia was only worried that he would bring shame to the sect. Only he himself knew the feeling of great pressure. To him, this was a battle that concerned his future, and it was an important battle that he absolutely could not lose. Please. Lung Lung was slightly stunned. Although the trial competition was related to the qualification for the Archean trial, it was not a particularly important competition in essence. Generally, it was enough to deal with it normally. It was rare to see someone like Liangzhu who was so serious. However, Liangzhu's attitude also gave her a lot of pressure. After all, she had just made a breakthrough. She had not fully adapted to the strength of the peak of the late stage of Foundation Establishment Realm, let alone consolidating her strength. Now that she was facing Liangzhu, strictly speaking, she was the one who was at a disadvantage. Affected by the two of them, the atmosphere of the audience began to become dignified. Everyone's voice gradually became lower, and their eyes were all focused on Lung Lung and Liangzhu. They all secretly guessed at the same time. Who will make the first move? It was reasonable to say that in this kind of competition, the stronger side would usually make the first move and seize the initiative. However, Liang Zu's posture was as if he was facing a great enemy. For the first time, he took the initiative to take a defensive posture, which really made people's eyes pop out. Isn't this guy a little too cautious? Everyone could not help but look at each other. Just when they were stunned, Lung Lung moved and took the initiative to attack. The weapons of the Archean Snow Sword sect's disciples were generally swords. Some would also choose weapons such as knives and spears. However, Lung Lung was an exception. So far, she had not specially practiced any weapons. Her only fighting method was close combat. Chapter 5191. Especially before she came out to the secular world, she was only at the early stage of foundation building. It was normal to not use a weapon at this level. There were many disciples who would start to practice a certain weapon when they reached the middle stage of foundation building. However, no one would have thought that in just 10 months, Lung Lung could rise all the way to the peak of the late stage of foundation building. Even her master would be shocked if he heard about this. So Lung Lung became a complete anomaly in the immemorial Snow Sword sect. She was a master at the peak of the late stage of foundation building, but she didn't even have a weapon and could only rely on her fists and feet to fight. But even so, Liang Zu didn't dare to take it lightly. Instead, he was very nervous, afraid that Lin Yi would teach Lung Lung some special moves to counter his Green Cloud sect. After all, there were so many examples before, he couldn't help but worry. What he didn't know was that Lin Yi only taught Lingshan and the others the counter moves. As for Lung Lung, she didn't do any homework in this aspect. The reason was simple: she didn't need it. The reason why Lin Yi spent so much effort to study the counter moves of each sect was purely because Lingshan and the others had just built their foundation not long ago. Their strength was too low. If they didn't use this method, it would be difficult for Lingshan and the others to qualify for the trial. But Lung Lung was different. With her talent and strength, it was not difficult for her to win 3 rounds. What Lung Lung needed the most at this stage was actual combat experience. If she used this kind of trick, she could win more easily, but it would be putting the cart before the horse. Lin Yi naturally wouldn't let her do such a stupid thing. In the blink of an eye, Lung Lung had already swept her leg. Liang Zu hurriedly dodged back subconsciously. But then he realized that the opponent was a disciple of the Snow Sword sect. If he dodged, wouldn't it be letting her become snow? Although there was a precedent like Lingshan, Liang Zu didn't have the confidence to copy Lingshan's strategy. After all, if he didn't go through special practice, this strategy would not only be ineffective, but it would be easy to get himself into trouble if he wasn't careful. Moreover, Lung Lung and Lingshan were on the same side, so they must have been prepared. Liang Zu reacted and immediately began to counterattack. In any case, he absolutely couldn't let Lung Lung Lian Shui continue. Otherwise, it would bode ill rather than well. Man! Xian Yijie sighed helplessly as he looked at the scene. His response was obviously different from before. Although Liang Zu was a peak late phase of foundation building, and was much stronger than Lingshan and the others, but in terms of battle experience and potential, he couldn't even compete with Lingshan and the others, let alone Lung Lung, who was extremely talented. Liang Zu's sudden attack was not out of Lung Lung's expectation. This time it was Lung Lung's turn to retreat. However, she was prepared to advance by retreating. Liang Zu couldn't even touch a strand of her hair in 3 consecutive moves. As a result, he was flustered and revealed a slight flaw. Lung Lung seized the opportunity and immediately whipped her leg. Bang! Liang Zu hurriedly used the long stick in front of his body to block. Finally, he was barely able to block the strength of Lung Lung's whipping kick. Unfortunately, his chest was still scratched. Even if it was just a light scratch, it was enough for Lung Lung. Don't forget that she had the shattered ice physique. The restrictive effect of the snow style was very obvious. It was enough to reduce the speed of a person by more than 30%. However, compared to the unique talent of the shattered ice physique, it was nothing. Even though Lung Lung was far from truly developing the power of the shattered ice physique, after being scratched by her kick, Liang Zu suddenly felt cold all over his body. He was caught off guard and his speed was suddenly reduced by a lot. It's over. Xian Yijie shook his head speechlessly. He clearly knew that Lung Lung had the shattered ice physique, but Liang Zu still let his opponent touch his body so easily. At the crucial moment, he even forgot to protect his body. How could he win like this? Facing an opponent like Lung Lung, no matter what kind of countermeasure was adopted, it was the basic common sense to maintain the protective true qi at all times. Because only in this way could he avoid the direct attack on his body and minimize the restrictive effect of the shattered ice physique. Otherwise, there was no way to fight at all. As expected, after Lung Lung's one move succeeded, she immediately launched a series of unceremonious attacks. Liang Zu's speed was greatly restricted. Even if he wanted to escape, he couldn't. He could only brace himself to deal with her. However, in this case, how could he resist Lung Lung, who was getting more and more powerful? The situation suddenly turned for the worse. Everyone was shocked. Liang Zu was supposed to have the upper hand in this battle. At the very least, they should be evenly matched. However, they didn't expect the situation to become like this all of a sudden. If it went on like this, it was only a matter of time before Lung Lung won this battle. Hee, the Blue Cloud sect of the North Island is really full of talents. I admire you. Xue Jianfeng sneered. Of course, he didn't want to see Lung Lung in the limelight. However, he also disliked Xianijia and the Blue Cloud sect of the North Island. It was not a bad thing to take this opportunity to ridicule them. Xianijia snorted and didn't answer. It was not that he didn't want to refute, but Liang Zu's poor performance really made him feel ashamed to refute. The sect was full of such mediocre disciples. The future of the Blue Cloud sect of the North Island was really worrying. The other disciples of the Blue Cloud sect of the North Island also felt ashamed. In this way, Liang Zu's performance in the field suddenly became even worse. He was under a lot of pressure, so he performed so abnormally because of nervousness. Now being pointed at by others, he became more and more nervous. Originally, he could only use 70% of his strength, but now he didn't even have 50%. The situation became completely one-sided. Liang Zu could barely hold on for a while, but now he had no strength to fight back. The winner was about to be decided. I can't lose. I absolutely can't lose. Being forced to the point of no retreat, Liang Zu began to become hysterical. He didn't care about Lung Lung's continuous attacks at all. He forcibly began to fight back crazily with the attitude of exchanging injuries for injuries. When the pressure reached the critical point, some people would completely collapse, or even become hysterical, while some people would be reborn like a phoenix in nirvana. Obviously, Liang Zu was definitely not the latter. If Liang Zu adopted this tough attitude of exchanging injuries for injuries at the beginning, it would be a wise strategy. After all, he had the absolute advantage in strength. Although it was inevitable that he would consume a lot of energy, and even leave serious injuries, as far as this battle was concerned, his chances of winning were actually higher than Lung Lung's. Unfortunately, he didn't have such awareness. Chapter 5192. He was completely restricted by Lung Lung's broken ice physique. Lung Lung didn't give him a chance to fight head-on. In this case, even if Liang Zu was in his peak state, he had no chance, not to mention that he had lost control of his emotions. The result was as everyone expected. Liang Zu's hysterical and crazy counterattack didn't bring him a chance to turn things around. Instead, it only made Lung Lung more proficient and made him lose faster. Xianijia and the other disciples of the Green Cloud sect were speechless. Although Liang Zu was not a genius disciple, he had always been steady. It was rare to see him perform abnormally. Today's performance was useless from beginning to end, which was something that had never happened before. It was really shameful in front of everyone. Thump! Liang Zu was once again kicked out by Lung Lung, and he struggled for a long time without being able to get up. A normal person in his situation would have already chosen to admit defeat. Liang Zu was not the kind of person who would stubbornly persist to the end, but at this moment, he had been struck out of his wits. Except for some subconscious movements, he had already completely forgotten about admitting defeat. Seeing Liang Zu's state, Lung Lung couldn't help but frown slightly. She and Liang Zu didn't have any relationship in the past or the present, so naturally, she wanted to stop. She didn't want to be ruthless, but Liang Zu didn't want to admit defeat. She could only continue to fight until Liang Zu admitted defeat, or was knocked unconscious. Unexpectedly, just as Lung Lung was about to knock him out, her entire body froze all of a sudden. The aura around her began to surge wildly. The inexplicable aura made the surrounding people secretly shocked. Not only that, the crowd even felt that this scene was somewhat familiar. No way. Lin Yi was the first to react. He didn't know whether to laugh or cry. This girl was going to repeat the scene of her breakthrough on the spot. Soon the other people also reacted. They looked at each other and cried out in shock. She's going to break through again? Didn't she just break through the day before yesterday? What's going on? One breakthrough after one match? Really? Even Xue Jianfeng was dumbfounded. In the last match, she broke through from the later stage of Foundation Establishment Realm to the peak of the later stage of Foundation Establishment Realm. If everything went well this time, she would break through from the peak of Foundation Establishment Realm to the great completion of Foundation Establishment Realm. Wasn't this leveling speed too exaggerated? Unbeknownst to him, Lung Lung had consumed a few supreme-grade foundation building pills that Lin Yi had given her during her closed-door training for the past few months. Although she did not directly break through to the next level, it had left a huge amount of undigested medicinal power in her body. If it was just her usual cultivation, perhaps it would take a few months for the medicinal efficacy to be completely released. However, it just so happened that she was in time for the grand contest. Facing a strong opponent of the same level, especially in the tense atmosphere of the contest, Lung Lung's essence, qi, and spirit were all adjusted to the best state. Under such circumstances, it was easy for the medicinal efficacy to be released in advance. Naturally, the breakthrough on the spot would be a matter of course. Lung Lung. One Ling Lung. On One Ling Lung. Lin Yi knew about the inside story, but the others didn't. They thought it was purely because of Lung Lung's superb aptitude. She was more than a genius, she was a super genius among geniuses. For a while, Lung Lung's position in everyone's heart was raised by a lot. She was originally a genius disciple with a little fame. Now she had become the leading figure of the young generation in the immemorial martial world, just like Ling Tianyu of the Thousand Blades flying together. The process of breakthrough could be long or short. If it was purely a good preparation, it might just be a matter of a blink of an eye. However, Lung Lung was breaking through for the second time in 3 days. No matter how much medicine was accumulated in her body, the whole process of breakthrough was difficult to be smooth. Just like now, Lung Lung's aura was obviously unstable. It seemed that even if she could break through successfully, it would take a lot of time. However, the crowd didn't show the slightest dissatisfaction. It was a rare experience for them to be able to see Lung Lung's legendary breakthrough in one match. This was an excellent topic for them to brag to others in the future. However, in the process of waiting, Liangzu, who had lost his soul, finally came to his senses. When he saw Lung Lung not far from him, he subconsciously made a counterattack, which immediately caused a burst of exclamation from the crowd. Bastard! A murderous intent flashed in Lin Yi's eyes. He was about to make a move to get rid of this reckless trash. However, before he made a move, Xianijia had already rushed into the field. Without hesitation, he raised his hand and slapped Liangzu away. Uncle Xian, what are you doing? Xue Jianfeng said with dissatisfaction. He couldn't wait for Liangzu to interrupt Lung Lung's breakthrough. At that time, not only would Lung Lung not be able to advance to the next level, she would also suffer a serious backlash. If she was unlucky, she might even lose her life. This was a great thing for him, but he didn't expect that it would be destroyed by Xianijia. Just as you can see, Xianijia's face was extremely gloomy at the moment. If Liangzu was only a disgrace to the Green Cloud sect because of his lack of strength, he would at most be ridiculed as a talent. However, now he actually did such a shameless thing. It was unbearable. If he didn't make a move and Liangzu interrupted Lung Lung's breakthrough, the entire Green Cloud sect of the North Island would be nailed to the pillar of shame and become the laughingstock of the entire archaic Jianghu. Not only that, it was bound to greatly offend Lin Yi. Xianijia even seriously suspected that if he didn't make a move first to slap Liangzu away, this guy might have already become a corpse. Uncle Xian, although you're the leader of the team, you're also the only referee of the contest. Is it appropriate for you to interfere in the process of the contest without any disguise? Xue Jianfeng sneered. In his opinion, this was a ready-made blackmail. Everyone looked at Xianijia. As a referee, he must always be an absolutely objective and neutral third party. Logically speaking, as long as the contest was not over, including Xianijia as a referee, no one could interfere in anything in the field. Even if Liangzu's sneak attack during Lung Lung's breakthrough was despicable and shameless, it was still allowed by the rules. Xianjia's action was indeed too arbitrary. Chapter 5193. This. Xue Jianfeng choked and forced himself to say. That's also against the rules. Well, if you insist, you can report it to the Archaic Alliance. Xianjia glanced at him. Xue Jianfeng snorted and gave up resentfully. Of course, he could not let go of Xianjia's weakness, but even if he really reported it to the Archaic Alliance, it would be useless. Because this was human nature. Except for the shameless lying Zhu, what Xianjia did was a happy thing for everyone else. The Archaic Alliance would never come forward to punish him. Otherwise, it would be seen as encouraging lying Zhu's shameless behavior. After a while, Lung Lung finally succeeded in breaking through. Under the envious gaze of the crowd, she officially advanced to the Foundation Establishment Perfected Realm, and became the person who truly stood at the top of all the disciples of the Archaic Alliance. He had the shattered ice physique to begin with, and now he had become a legend. Other than Ling Tianyu and Xue Jianfeng, there was no one else present who could compare to him. Even Duanmu Yu and the others might be slightly inferior to him. This was the true meaning of having boundless prospects. Miss Lung Lung, I'm really sorry just now. I apologize to you on behalf of the Green Cloud sect of the North Island. Xianjia walked in front of her and bowed deeply with a solemn expression. Lung Lung was stunned. She was fully focused on breaking through just now, so she did not notice Lying Zhu's little action at all, and did not know what happened after that. It was only until Lin Yi walked over and explained in a low voice that Lung Lung finally understood. She quickly said, Master Xine, you're being too serious. You don't have to apologize to me. Actually, I should be the one thanking you properly. No matter what, you're the one who protected me. Even if Xianjia did not step forward, Lying Zhu could not hurt Lung Lung at all. After all, Lin Yi was watching. However, Xianjia still did her a big favor. No matter what his consideration was, Lung Lung was the biggest beneficiary. There was no doubt about this. Miss Lung Lung is too polite. That's what I should do. Xianjia smiled bitterly and nodded to Lin Yi. He then announced to the crowd that the competition would continue. The rest of the competition was uneventful, and a day later, it was Ling Shan and the others' turn. This time, most of them passed without any mishap. After the first round, they were much more used to the new level of foundation establishment, and the counter moves Lin Yi had taught them were much more proficient as well. Naturally, they were more at ease when facing opponents of the same level as them. This time, other than their own people, the only one who lost was Ziyu. This girl got Yu Bing in the first round and got a win for free. It looked like she was lucky, but it was actually a loss. If she had gone all out in the first round like the others instead of just going through the motions, she might not have lost the second round. Strictly speaking, her opponent wasn't that strong, and the only reason she lost was because she wasn't used to the early phase of foundation establishment in the atmosphere. She still had to pay the tuition fee. But this wasn't a bad thing. After this loss, Ziyu had matured a lot. Compared to success, most of the time, failure was more motivating. Especially for a little girl like Ziyu who didn't know how high the sky was, this experience was even more valuable. Lin Yi smiled as he looked at Ziyu, who was training extra. This was good too. No matter how strong he was, he couldn't always protect everyone under his wing. If even the youngest Ziyu was starting to realize this, then the others wouldn't slack off either. After all, if they couldn't even beat Ziyu, then they'd really lose face. This was quite a pleasant surprise. In the third round, the number of people who signed up for the cross-level challenge was less than half of the second round. There were only 3 people in total. At this time, everyone had more or less understood each other. In order to succeed in challenging someone of a higher level, other than having sufficient strength, there was another crucial condition, and that was to catch the opponent off guard. Only then would it be possible for the stronger opponent to fail miserably. Otherwise, if everyone knew each other thoroughly, the originally small chance of victory would be even slimmer. Just like that, many of the disciples who had the impulse to challenge him gave up spontaneously. However, even though the number of people had decreased, the challengers had clearly become much stronger. Those who still had the guts to challenge him at this time were naturally not easy to deal with. Of the 3 cross-level battles, although only one of them succeeded in the end, from the looks of it, the other 2 battles were also evenly matched. The 2 challengers' chances of winning were actually not low. It was just that their luck was not too good, which led to them losing in the end. I didn't think so at first, but now that I look at it, the rules of this tournament are really cruel. One of the disciples sighed, and the others sighed as well. Even Linny couldn't help but nod. There were a total of 6 people in the 3 battles, but there was only one winner out of the 6, and that was the challenger who succeeded in the cross-level challenge. As for the other 5, they probably didn't have a good ending. The one who succeeded in the cross-level challenge didn't need to be mentioned. According to the rules, he was already eliminated. As for the remaining 4, the results weren't as direct, but the process was too intense. All 4 of them were injured quite badly, and unless they had some strong elixir like the Great Recovery Pill, they wouldn't be able to recover in a short period of time. If this trend continued, not only would they not be able to win the 3rd round, but even the 4th and 5th rounds wouldn't be good either. If they lost all 3 rounds, they would naturally be eliminated. Just 3 rounds had eliminated 5 people. It wasn't an exaggeration to say that the rules were cruel. The higher-ups of the Archaic Alliance had racked their brains to come up with these rules. Those who were able to stand out under these cruel rules, no matter how strong they were, at the very least they weren't weaklings unless they were extremely lucky. But then again, for a trial like the Archaic Trials that was full of chance, luck was also a part of one's strength. To put it nicely, luck was also a part of one's strength. Chapter 5194. Due to Lung Lung's breakthrough, the number of disciples in the foundation building realm full cycle was restored to 8. Of course, this was only temporary. Everyone knew that this kind of competition would get more intense as time went on, and the probability of casualties would increase. Xianijia immediately began to draw lots for everyone. Everyone was looking forward to it. With Lin Yi, Xue Jianfeng, and Lung Lung, the 3 gimmick characters, in addition to Duan Muyu and other powerful disciples from various sects, the battle between the disciples in the foundation building realm full cycle would be interesting. Everyone would not miss it. In this group, the most anticipated match was none other than the pinnacle battle between Lin Yi and Xue Jianfeng. It was a pity that this round of drawing didn't fulfill everyone's wishes, but the result didn't disappoint them too much, because this time, Xue Jianfeng's opponent was Lung Lung, who had just broken through. Interesting, really interesting. Both of them are genius disciples of the Snow Sword sect, and they have a grudge against each other. This is a civil war in the Snow Sword sect. Everyone was delighted. They were the typical spectators. However, for Lung Lung, the result of drawing lots was not that fun. As a disciple of the same sect, she was quite familiar with Xue Jianfeng's strength. Although they were on the same level in name, she had just broken through to the foundation building realm full cycle. Obviously, she could not be compared with Xue Jianfeng. This battle would not bode well for her. Lung Lung, you have to be prepared to admit defeat. This guy's strength is not what you expected. Lin Yi suddenly pulled Lung Lung aside and reminded her softly. What do you mean? Lung Lung was shocked when she heard that. She indeed felt that the outcome of this battle was not optimistic, but she had the unique gift of the shattered ice physique after all. Facing Xue Jianfeng, who was also in the foundation building great circle, it was not that she had no chance of winning at all. At least she still had a chance to fight, but Lin Yi's words clearly said that she would definitely lose. There's something I haven't told you. Actually, Xue Jianfeng's current strength is not in the foundation building realm full cycle, but in the gold core realm, said Lin Yi. Gold core realm full cycle? Lung Lung was stunned for a moment. If her opponent was a foundation building full cycle, she would definitely stand a chance against him. However, he was only a beginner stage gold core cultivator. She quickly lowered her voice and exclaimed in astonishment. How could he be a beginner stage gold core cultivator? Breaking through to the gold core realm was many times more difficult than breaking through to the foundation realm. Even with the spiritual chi conditions of the transition islands, one had to have medicinal pills like the gold core realm. However, medicinal pills like the gold core realm could only be obtained after passing the sect's special test, and then approved by the Elders Guild after a discussion. Xue Jianfeng had clearly not passed the test, so how could he have the gold core realm? That's because he betrayed the Snow Sword School and secretly sought refuge with the center. He consumed the medicinal pills given by the center, which allowed him to recover his dantian and meridians. At the same time, his strength increased by a great deal. He broke through from great completion of foundation establishment to early gold core stage. Lin Yi explained. In order to prevent people from gossiping, he did not mention these things to the others previously. However, he had no choice but to say it in front of Kult. What? Kult was extremely shocked. Xue Jianfeng had always insisted that he was a traitor. She did not expect that he was the real traitor. Don't tell anyone about this first. Just pretend that you don't know anything. I'll explain the rest to you later. I have my own arrangements, Linny reminded. Kult was stunned for a long time before she finally digested this shocking inside story. She took a deep breath and nodded heavily. I understand. And you must be careful. Xue Jianfeng does not have good intentions. He will definitely find an opportunity to deal a heavy blow to you later. He might even take your life directly. So you must not force yourself. Surrender immediately when the situation is not good. Understand? Linny said seriously. He was very clear that Xue Jianfeng was already unscrupulous in order to strike him down. He had been thinking of ways to get people to deal a killing blow to Lingshan and the others. Although he did not succeed, this guy had never given up. Now that he had the chance to face Kult directly, he would definitely not give up. Don't worry. I know what I'm doing, Kult nodded. Hey, what are you two whispering about again? Can we start now? Xue Jianfeng shouted from afar. He finally had the chance to deal with Kult with his own hands. This was really a blessing from the heavens. He could not wait any longer. Kult and Linny looked at each other. They immediately stepped into the arena and said indifferently, Please. Sure. Although both of us are disciples of the Snow Sword School, we have never really fought before. Xue Jianfeng smiled coldly with a playful expression. This was a matter of course. No matter how much Kult was valued by the higher-ups of the school, her strength level was still too low. She was only at the early stage of foundation building before she came out to the secular world to train. Xue Jianfeng, on the other hand, was at the full cycle of foundation building. Their strengths were not on the same level at all. Naturally, there was no point in sparring with each other. So what? Kult looked at him coldly. Then I'll take this opportunity to have a taste of your ice shatter physique. I hope you won't disappoint me too much, Xue Jianfeng said disdainfully. If it was in the past, he would still be a little afraid of Kult, who was at the full cycle of foundation building. However, it was completely different now. Same to you. Kult's expression was still as calm as usual. In the eyes of others, they would think that she was holding back her strength to defeat Xue Jianfeng. Even Xue Jianfeng was fooled by her. She secretly sneered in her heart. I'll let you taste the taste of despair later. After Xianji's announcement, the duel between the two officially began. However, to everyone's surprise, there was not the fiery atmosphere that everyone expected at the beginning. Both Xue Jianfeng and Leng Leng did not act rashly. Both of them had chosen to strike after the other. Xue Jianfeng relied on his overwhelming strength advantage. To him, it did not matter whether he struck first or later. However, unless it was absolutely necessary, he did not want to expose his strength at the early stage of Gold Core. Therefore, he chose this strategy to force Kult to strike first. Then, he would wait for an opportunity to counterattack. This guy is a lot more experienced. Linny could not help but raise his eyebrows at the scene. Chapter 5195. The situation made Leng Leng frown. She was also thinking of retreating in order to advance. After all, her strength was at a disadvantage. This was the most reasonable choice for her. But she did not expect Xue Jianfeng to be so calm. In the silent confrontation, the atmosphere suddenly became oppressive and tense. If one's willpower was slightly weaker, even a simple bystander would feel suffocated, let alone the two people who were confronting each other in the field. The longer the confrontation, the greater the pressure. When it reached a certain point, the pressure was enough to crush one alive. In the end, one would even lose the courage to attack and become a real defeated soldier. Of course, this was definitely not Xue Jianfeng's plan. What he wanted was not just a victory, but Leng Leng's life. If he really forced Leng Leng to admit defeat, it would be a complete failure for him. Finally, after the two of them confronted each other for the time it took to burn a stick of incense, Leng Leng finally took the initiative to move. 1 step, 2 steps, 3 steps. With every step she took, her speed suddenly increased. After 10 steps, not only did her speed increase to the extreme, even her aura had also climbed to the peak. Smart. Xianji's eyes lit up. The others did not understand it, but he understood the deep meaning behind it. Linny nodded as well. Cold was indeed very smart. The confrontation just now wasn't a good thing for her. Due to the difference in strength between them, it was impossible for her to be more composed than Xue Jianfeng. On the contrary, it had unknowingly worn down his most important drive and confidence, to the extent that he had already lost before he even made a move. Anyone with a discerning eye could see the advantages and disadvantages. Naturally, Lung herself was clear about it. However, this was her established strategy. She could not mess up the moment she started. Therefore, even if she had to bite the bullet, she could only confront Xue Jianfeng. When she reached the limit of her endurance for the time it took to burn a stick of incense, she did not rashly make the first move. Instead, she came up with this method to regroup herself. In just 10 steps, she had regained the peak aura she had when she fought with her opponent. To be able to do this under such huge pressure, Lung was indeed not simple. If it was someone else, it would be hard for them not to collapse on the spot, just like Liangzu, who made a fool of himself in the previous round. You're quite something. Xue Jianfeng was also very surprised, but he immediately sneered disdainfully. Even so, it's still a mantis trying to stop a chariot. Can you stop it? Although Cold Lung's performance was eye-catching, it could not change the fact that she was forced to make a move. In terms of strategy alone, she had actually fallen into a passive position. In the face of an opponent like Xue Jianfeng, it was obviously unrealistic to strike first. Even if Cold had recovered to her peak condition, the series of attacks that came head-on could not hurt Xue Jianfeng at all. Xue Jianfeng did not even unsheath his sword as he easily dodged all of her punches and kicks. This formed a sharp contrast with the previous battle between Lung and Liangzu. The same attack made Liangzu breathless until he was finally defeated. But now it didn't cause any threat to Xue Jianfeng. This was the huge gap in strength. You're being praised to the point of being a god. Could it be that you only have this much? Isn't this a little too disappointing? Xue Jianfeng mocked. Lung ignored him and continued to attack ferociously. Even though she knew that she could not hurt her opponent, she did not have the slightest intention of giving up. I know, she's trying to form a snow form. Someone among the spectators finally came to a realization. Xue Jianfeng's series of dodging movements were undoubtedly elegant and calm, but at the same time, it also gave Lung the opportunity to form a snow form easily. After the previous 2 rounds of competition, everyone had a deep impression of the strength of the snow form. Are you stupid? What's the use of forming a snow form in front of Xue Jianfeng? Someone immediately retorted. In terms of controlling the fire of the snow form, Xue Jianfeng was definitely far more experienced than Lung. Using the snow form to deal with others might be useful, but to use it against Xue Jianfeng, it was simply showing off in front of an expert. Perhaps one would even shoot oneself in the foot. That's right. Moreover, Lung has the shattered ice physique. Why would she need to put in so much effort to form a snow form? Someone else chimed in. After all, in terms of restraining effect, the shattered ice physique was far more unique than the snow form. Moreover, it was more difficult to defend against. If Lung really did that, she would be neglecting the essentials. She would not do such a meaningless and stupid thing. However, if it's not for forming a snow form, then what is she doing now? Is she just struggling in vain? Everyone had a puzzled look on their faces. They did not know the true strength of Xue Jianfeng. From their point of view, although Lung had just achieved a breakthrough, she was still a prodigy with the shattered ice physique. Moreover, she had also created a legend of one breakthrough after another. Therefore, she must be at the same level as Xue Jianfeng. Even if Lung was slightly weaker in terms of strength, the difference would not be too huge. It was impossible for her to be so powerless in the current situation where she could not even touch the corner of Xue Jianfeng's clothes, right? No one would believe such a thing, except for Xue Jianfeng himself. Although he had yet to fully display the true strength of an early-stage gold core cultivator, even so, he was not a match for an ordinary foundation-perfected disciple. It was more than enough to deal with Lung's level of attack. Just like that, Lung had continuously attacked Xue Jianfeng for 20 times. Xue Jianfeng was still unscathed. Just when everyone thought that he was going to continue dodging in a playful manner, he suddenly unsheathed his snow sword. His first move was the Snow Sword's iconic snow form. Xianijia's expression changed. Although Xue Jianfeng did not display his strength of an early-stage gold core cultivator, and the others did not notice anything unusual, Xianijia was an early-stage gold core expert. He could more or less sense something unusual, but he could not react in time. This guy is really full of confidence. Linny could not help but laugh and shake his head. Xue Jianfeng's snow form was indeed very sudden. In terms of power, it was considered top-notch among the Foundation perfected level. An ordinary person would not be able to withstand it. However, he was facing Lung Lung after all. Was this an ordinary opponent? Sure enough, Xue Jianfeng revealed his killing intent at this moment. However, Lung Lung seemed to be prepared for it. She had already retreated a moment before Xue Jianfeng struck. Xue Jianfeng was slightly stunned. He seemed to be a little surprised. The snow form was a technique that could easily reveal its flaws. His stunned reaction made the flaw even more obvious. Good chance. The spectator's eyes lit up. Chapter 5196. So careful. Aren't you a little too timid? Xue Jianfeng snorted. He had indeed miscalculated the snow-killing style in the beginning, but the obvious flaw that was exposed later was deliberate. He wanted to use this opportunity to bait Lung Lung into taking the bait. As long as Lung Lung advanced rashly, he had absolute confidence that he could kill her with one strike. At worst, he would just reveal his gold core realm in public. However, since Lung Lung insisted on not taking the bait, he dared not act rashly. Otherwise, if Lung Lung was lucky enough to escape but exposed his strength at the same time, his wishful thinking would be in vain. By then, Lung Lung would definitely admit defeat in public, and he would not have the chance to attack again. You talk too much nonsense. Lung Lung had already attacked again. Her attacks were as violent as the beginning, but she still could not hurt Xue Jianfeng at all. Is that so? You may not hear this nonsense in the future. For you, this might be your last life experience. Xue Jianfeng grinned meaningfully, and then kept his snow sword again, returning to the initial situation. He was now like a patient beast, waiting for the moment his prey showed a flaw, and then pounced on it. Before that, he had to keep his claws to avoid scaring his prey away. What is she doing? Bing Wuqing was secretly puzzled as she watched this scene. As a chess piece that Linny had secretly subdued, of course, he knew that Lung Lung must have known the difference in strength between him and the enemy. Logically speaking, there were only two choices in this situation. Either she admitted defeat as soon as the fight started, which should be the safest way to ensure her safety, or she chose to admit defeat after putting on an act for a while. This was more or less risky, but it could be used to numb Xue Jianfeng and let him continue to think that his strength had not been exposed. However, what Lung Lung was doing now had completely exceeded the level of putting on an act. All of her attacks seemed futile, but they were definitely not meaningless struggles. There had to be a reason behind it. It was just that Bing Wuqing couldn't figure out what exactly she wanted to do at the moment. It was normal that he could not figure it out. Other than Lung Lung herself, only Linny knew the answer to this question, because he was the one who helped Lung Lung research and develop this trump card. In the blink of an eye, the two of them exchanged over a dozen moves. Just as Xue Jianfeng's patience was about to run out, Lung Lung suddenly asked, "How many moves have you made?" "What?" Xue Jianfeng was stunned. He subconsciously replied, 32 moves? That's enough. Lung Lung nodded. Then she suddenly stopped moving and said faintly from 3 steps away, "I'll let you try out my new move, prison drawing." As soon as he finished speaking, Xue Jianfeng felt as if he had fallen into an ice cellar. As a disciple of the Snow Sword School, he had sufficient resistance to the cold, but at this moment, he truly felt what was called bone-piercing cold. This was no longer a problem of his movement technique being affected. If he could not break free in time, even he would definitely be frozen to death. Prison on the ground? Looking at Xue Jianfeng's strange posture of being frozen in an instant, everyone was collectively shocked. Each of them looked at Lung Lung as if they were looking at a monster. Could it be that all her previous struggles were not in vain, but in preparation for this prison on the ground? Upon seeing the situation, Linny could not help but reveal a satisfied smile. Lung Lung's biggest reliance was naturally her ice-shattering physique. However, She had never been able to truly unleash the power of her unique move. If she was still in the early stage of foundation building, it would not be a big deal. However, she was now in the full circle of foundation building after a series of breakthroughs, and was about to break through to the golden core stage. If she did not even have a basic trump card, it would be unjustifiable. Once she encountered a strong opponent, she would be at a great disadvantage. Therefore, Linny had already begun to plan and design for Lung Ling a few months ago. After continuous attempts and improvements, it was only right before the start of the training tournament that the results were finalized. However, the opponents that Lung Ling encountered in the early stage of Golden Core stage were not strong enough, so it could not be used. It was only until she encountered Xue Jianfeng, a strong opponent in the early stage of Golden Core stage, that it could finally be put to use. By subtly integrating the characteristic of ice-shattering physique into her vital energy, and then using a special method to cause the vital energy to remain after it was released. As the vital energy itself was not strong, its lethality was not strong either. Naturally, a strong opponent like Xue Jianfeng would not pay attention to it. He would not notice that the residual vital energy was following him. When it accumulated to a certain extent, it would become a strange prison that followed him like a shadow. By the time Lung Ling fully unleashed the characteristic of ice-shattering physique, even Xue Jianfeng would not be able to withstand the bone-chilling coldness of the prison. Moreover, he could not shake it off even if he wanted to, nor could he escape from it even if he wanted to. This was the prison of drawing ground. Even though it was a newly created technique, and there was still a lot of room for improvement in the future, the prison of drawing ground was enough to fully unleash the advantage of the ice-shattering physique. It was not an exaggeration to say that it was Lung Ling's unique trump card. If she was only facing an opponent of the same level, Lung Ling did not have to go through so much trouble to cast the prison of drawing ground. She could easily release it in 3 to 5 moves. Its power was enough to freeze an opponent of the same level to death. However, Xue Jianfeng was an early-stage Golden Core stage expert. 3 to 5 moves were obviously not enough. That was why Lung Ling did not care about anything and used a total of 32 moves to create this extreme version of the prison of drawing ground. Lung Ling was initially worried whether this technique would be effective or not. After all, this was not an ordinary battle against an opponent of a higher level, but an actual battle against an opponent of a higher realm. Even the extreme version of the prison of drawing ground might not be effective. However, after seeing Xue Jianfeng's condition, her heart that was hanging in suspense was immediately relieved. It was not just effective, it was simply too effective. If Xue Jianfeng could not think of a way to break the prison of drawing ground in time, he would definitely be frozen to death on the spot after a while. Amazing! Bing Wuqing glanced at Lin Yi discreetly. Her heart was filled with reverence. Even though the prison of drawing ground was Lung Ling's unique technique in her opinion, the one who was truly amazing was still Lin Yi. Compared to the prison of drawing ground itself, this unrestrained creativity was the truly fearsome thing. His profound understanding of vital energy was definitely not a realm that a mere foundation-building expert could have. Even Golden Core stage and nascent soul stage experts might not be able to have such a profound understanding. Thinking back to the miraculous abilities that Lin Yi had displayed previously, Bing Wuqing could not help but be shocked once again. Who exactly was this person? Chapter 5197. This was under the condition that they did not know Xue Jianfeng's true strength. Otherwise, they would have gone crazy collectively. What a pity, it's still lacking a little. Lin Yi shook his head imperceptibly. He was also shocked that the confinement spell could be so powerful. However, it was Lung Ling's first time using it in public. She was still not proficient enough. She was still lacking if she wanted to strangle Xue Jianfeng, an early-stage Golden Core expert. As expected, as soon as Lin Yi's voice died away, there was a sudden change in the field. Ah! Xue Jianfeng let out a series of deafening roars. Then the veins all over his body twitched violently. An unprecedented and inexplicable aura was released from his body. Everyone was stunned and looked at each other. Even Exinejia cried out involuntarily. Early-stage Gold Core. He's already in the early-stage Gold Core. Although with Xue Jianfeng's strength as the #1 foundation-building expert, it was only a matter of time for him to break through to the Gold Core realm. If it happened in the ancient underworld, they would at most be surprised and would not be so shocked. However, the problem was that they were in the transit islands. Where did Xue Jianfeng get his gold core, and when did he break through to the gold core realm? Why was there no movement at all? After a while, Xue Jianfeng finally moved freely again. It seemed that he had completely broken free from the prison on ground. His expression was terrible. He immediately pounced at Lung Lung with a ferocious look. In fact, it was no wonder that he was angry. This time, not only did he fail to take the opportunity to kill Lung Lung, but he was also forced to expose his gold core realm strength in public. To him, it was like going for wool and coming home shorn. I admit defeat. Lung Lung was already prepared for this. She immediately exited the field and shouted. According to the rules of the competition, as long as one of the two parties admitted defeat on the spot, they were not allowed to make any further attacks. However, Xue Jianfeng deliberately turned a deaf ear to it. Not only did he expose his gold core realm strength, but he was also frozen by Lung Lung's prison on ground. It was intolerable. Even if he had to break the rules, he had to kill her with one slash. Lung Lung was shocked. The extreme version of the prison on ground had consumed too much of her physical strength and vital energy. Facing Xue Jianfeng, who was like a mad beast, she had no strength to resist at all. However, before Xue Jianfeng could charge over, another figure arrived far faster than him. It was Lin Yi. Lin Yi had long guessed that Xue Jianfeng wouldn't leave the matter at that. With the strength of his primordial spirit now, even though he didn't have the confidence to fight against an Aura's core stage expert that was a whole realm higher, he still had an endless amount of miraculous tricks up his sleeves. It was enough to deal with Xue Jianfeng. Damn it! Xue Jianfeng was taken aback by Lin Yi's speed. If it wasn't for the orders from above, he would have taken the opportunity to kill Lin Yi and Lung Lung, killing two birds with one stone. Stop! At this time, Xianijia also intervened. He looked at Xue Jianfeng with full vigilance as if he was facing a formidable enemy. If Xue Jianfeng was still in the great completion of Foundation Establishment realm, he naturally would not be so nervous. However, he had to be careful when facing an expert of the same level. If Xue Jianfeng really made up his mind to do something reckless, he, as the leader of the team, would be in trouble. Humph! Xue Jianfeng finally stopped. Xianijia was also a strong opponent of the same level to him. Moreover, there was also Lin Yi, who was no less troublesome than Xianijia. In addition to that, there was also Lung Lung's prison drawing. If he continued to force his way, he was destined to suffer a great loss. He had no choice but to stop. However, Xianijia did not plan to let him go just like that. He scolded. Lung Lung has already admitted defeat, but you still want to kill her. What's your intention? Do you really think that the rules of the trial competition are just for show? Are you trying to challenge the dignity of the entire Archaic Alliance? Xianijia, don't you dare put shit on my head. My ears were frostbitten just now, so I didn't hear it. Xue Jianfeng said indifferently. Since he had shown his strength of the early gold core stage, there was naturally no need to call Xianijia master. As an expert of the same level, he only needed to call Xianijia by his name. This was the custom of the archaic underworld. Really? Xianijia obviously did not believe him. If you don't believe me, why don't you have a taste of her prison of drawing? Xue Jianfeng snorted and curled his lips. What he said was a random excuse, but it was true that he was frostbitten by the prison of drawing. Moreover, it was not an ordinary injury. If he did not take good care of it, there would be repercussions. Of course, Xianijia would not believe his nonsense. However, since Xue Jianfeng had said so, he could not continue to insist. He could only go along with the flow and said, "Since you didn't hurt Ling Lung, I'll turn a blind eye this time. You're on your own." Xue Jianfeng snorted and turned away without any appreciation. His priority now was to find a place to heal his injuries. It would be best if he could get some healing elixirs from the glasses professor. Unfortunately, everything was not going well for him. Not only did he fail to kill the people around Lin Yi according to his plan, but he was also injured due to his carelessness. Moreover, it was from the hands of Lung Lung, who had just reached the great perfection of Foundation Establishment realm. He really did not have the face to meet the glasses professor. Fortunately, he had won all 3 rounds and was qualified to participate in the trial. It would not matter even if he took his time to heal his injuries. The trial continued. Although the following duels also had a popular figure like Lin Yi, it was far less exciting than the first match because of his opponent. After all, Xue Jianfeng was a gold core stage master, and Lung Lung almost succeeded with the prison of drawing. It was a scene that had not been seen in the archaic alliance for decades. Even if it was a little dull at the beginning, it was still a rare classic duel. In comparison, the other duels of the great perfection of Foundation Establishment realm inevitably paled in comparison. Including Lin Yi's match, the remaining 3 duels of the great perfection of Foundation Establishment realm seemed to be lukewarm. Duan Muyu's match was relatively more interesting. Due to her loss to Lin Yi in the previous round, Duan Muyu's current record was 1 win and 1 loss. Therefore, this match was very important. It would be gratifying if she could successfully win, but if she lost, it would mean that she had to guarantee a complete victory in the next 2 rounds to qualify for the trial. Otherwise, she would be eliminated. Coincidentally, this time her opponent, Lei Gong, also had 1 win and 1 loss. They were also determined to win this duel. If her opponent was Xue Jianfeng or Lin Yi, Lei Gong might choose to admit defeat early. After all, it was impossible for him to be a match for either of them. It was better to conserve his strength for the next round of duels. Chapter 5198. Lei Gong knew that he was not a weakling. Facing an opponent like Duan Muyu, it was not impossible for him to win. Especially in the second round, Lin Yi's method of cracking the scent of autumn had given him an excellent reference. It was no exaggeration to say that he had at least a 60% chance of winning. As expected, in this duel where he was determined to win, Duan Muyu used the signature move of falling leaves in autumn as soon as he came up. Under the chilling autumn tint, he instantly became invisible just like before. Haha, child's play. Lei Gong was prepared for this. Almost at the same moment when Duan Muyu's figure disappeared, he had already cut her waist with his hand, almost copying Lin Yi's method of cracking the move in the previous round. This hand knife did not focus on power but speed. As long as he could successfully cut Duan Muyu's waist, he would definitely win. Although there was a slight suspicion of imitating, it had to be said that his response was indeed a brilliant psychological attack. Moreover, his reaction and speed were sufficiently fast, and it was extremely easy for others to be caught off guard. However, to his surprise, his knife hand actually missed. His knife hand slashed across, but there was still nothing in front of him. In the next moment, a palm-sized dark steel leaf abruptly smashed into his back. Lei Gong was originally a huge, burly man, but after being hit by this leaf, he was actually sent flying on the spot, directly over the heads of the crowd and into the sea. In this way, he was naturally eliminated. A mountain of leaves. Xianji's eyelids twitched. Although this move was far less famous than Scent of Autumn, it was one of the rare tough killer moves of the Yiling sect. Its power was top-notch in the Foundation Establishment stage. However, there were very few people in the Yiling sect who had truly mastered this move, so it was even more difficult for outsiders to see it. This was the first time Duan Muyu had used this move in public. To be able to send a burly man like Lei Gong flying with one move, a mountain of leaves really lived up to its name. Seeing Duan Muyu calmly walk to the side to meditate and recover her qi, everyone couldn't help but look at each other. This woman was as tough as a man, really not someone to be trifled with. With Scent of Autumn and a mountain of leaves, no one except for people like Lin Yi would be able to withstand it. The third round of the competition continued in an orderly manner. With the previous 2 rounds as a foreshadowing, the performance of the contestants in this round was significantly less probing attacks. They often used their trump cards right from the start, and the duels entered a white-hot stage right from the start. Basically, the winner could be decided in 2 or 3 moves. This way, they could save more stamina for the 4th and 5th round of the competition. It wasn't long before it was time for Lingshan and the others to go on stage again, and their performances were as dazzling as usual. Lingshan, Chen Tian, and the others won all 3 battles, getting the chance to participate in the test early. As for Kong Xiaobo and the others, they didn't win all 3 battles, but they managed to get 2 wins and 1 loss. The situation was pretty good. The only exception was Ying Ziyu. She was the only one who didn't have a good future. After 3 rounds, she won 1 and lost 2, and the only win was from Yu Bing in the first round. The other 2 were easily defeated by the Archaic Alliance disciples, and she couldn't use the counter moves Lin Yi taught her at all. If this continued, things wouldn't look good for her. Ziyu Yu. Facing a situation like this, even Linny didn't know what to do. He'd already done everything he could to come up with a counter-move for the sex, and they only needed to memorize it in the exam room. But with Ziyu's situation, he couldn't possibly take the test himself, could he? Linny bro, am I useless? Ziyu smiled bitterly. Lin Yi's heart skipped a beat as he looked at her. Although the girl was still forcing a smile on her face, tears were already welling up in her eyes. She was just trying her best not to let them fall. No. Lin Yi shook his head, feeling a little heartache as he looked at Ziyu pretending to be strong. He regretted it a little. At her age, he should have let her stay in the common world and enjoy her school life, but now he wanted to bring her to the archaic trials. Wasn't he being too hasty? It seems like I'll have to stay here alone this time, Ziyu said desolately. When Lin Yi brought up the idea of letting everyone participate in the archaic trials, she was the one who was the most eager to go. But from the looks of things now, she basically had no fate with the archaic trials anymore. Don't give up, you still have a chance. Lin Yi comforted. Lin Yi bro, you don't need to comfort me. I know my situation the best. It's impossible for me to win the next 2 rounds. Ziyu smiled bitterly. She could have placed her hopes on luck, since if she were lucky enough to get her own people in the next 2 rounds, she'd be guaranteed a spot in the test. It was a shame that Ling Shan, Wu Chantian, and the others who'd won all 3 rounds had gotten the spot prematurely, and in order to prevent them from affecting the fairness of the test, they weren't allowed to participate in the lot drawing anymore. The only people who had a chance were Xiaobo and a few others. Not only was the chance very low, but even if they did get their people, Ziyu wouldn't be able to ask Kong Xiaobo and the others to go easy on her. After all, even Kong Xiaobo and the others wouldn't be guaranteed a spot in the trials. Ling Shan and the others looked at each other. They wanted to comfort her, but they didn't know what to say. They knew that Ziyu had always been a headstrong person, and if they didn't say something right, not only wouldn't they be able to comfort her, it might even have the opposite effect. Nothing is impossible. You can't look at things from a pessimistic perspective. Although it's a pity that you've lost 2 matches in a row, if you look at it from an optimistic perspective, everything will be fine as long as you win 2 more matches, right? Plus, this situation isn't too bad. You might not be able to think of a solution on your own, but don't forget about me. Lin Yi smiled. You have a solution, Lin Yi bro? Ziyu's eyes lit up, but she shook her head. It's useless, I'm too useless. You've already taught me all the moves, but I can't help but get nervous when I'm in the field, and I forget everything when I'm nervous. I can't use any moves at all, I'm just a piece of trash. Chapter 5199. Solo training? Ziyu paused, surprised. Is there enough time to do it now? The counter moves they learned before were just a last-minute effort, and they only used 3 days to learn them all. But they were in the middle of the tournament, and even if they had 2 days in between, it was only enough for them to recover their chi and stamina. Where would they find the time for solo training? There's enough time, of course there's enough time. This isn't something new, just a revision of the counter moves I taught you before. Lin Yi signaled for Ziyu to get on the boat and rowed it back to the Blue Cloud Sect's private island. Revision? Would that work? Ziyu wasn't confident at all. She was a fearless person, but things like exams were the only thing she couldn't do. This competition was like a test to her, and her mind was blank the moment she entered the exam room. Even if she memorized the counter moves now, it wouldn't work when the time came. Don't worry, this isn't just revision. It's made for you. Lin Yi smiled mysteriously. He'd found the problem now, and it wasn't hard to come up with a solution. Really? Ziyu only recovered now. She wasn't confident in herself but in Lin Yi. If Lin Yi dared to say something like this, then he must have a way to help her get through this. On the other side, everyone watched as the 2 rowed away. Ling Shan couldn't help but worry. Ziyu will be fine, right? Don't worry, she'll be fine with boss personally. We just need to wait and see, Chantian said without hesitation. The others looked at each other and smiled. Since Lin Yi said he'd bring everyone to the primordial trials, he wouldn't leave Ziyu behind. He'd never disappoint them, not in the past, not in the future. In the 4th round of the competition, Xue Jianfeng, Lin Yi, and the others who had won all 3 rounds had qualified early. There were also some who had lost all 3 rounds and were eliminated early. Adding on the losers who had been heavily injured in the previous rounds, There were clearly fewer disciples participating in this round. For example, there were 8 people in the last round but only 5 were left in this round. Without Xue Jianfeng and Lin Yi, this round wasn't as exciting as before. Lung Lung and Duanmu Yu were the only ones left. The former was a genius disciple who almost used prison formation to turn the tables on a golden core master, and the latter was a senior sister who was slowly showing off the strength of Yiling's sect. Both of them were beauties too, so it was a rare sight to see. Unfortunately, the 2 women did not encounter each other this time. However, what surprised everyone was that whether it was Kuld or Duanmu Yu, they should be considered as the top existence among the remaining perfected foundation establishment experts. However, in the end, both of them were defeated at the same time. The 2 great perfection of foundation establishment realm disciples who had drawn them had already accepted their fate after learning the results of the draw. After all, the strength that the 2 women had displayed earlier was indeed not to be underestimated. Ordinary experts of the same level basically had no chance of winning against them. Therefore, the 2 of them had only held on to the belief that they would definitely lose and had given it their all. They didn't think that they'd actually win. Not only were the bystanders flabbergasted, but even they themselves found it hard to believe. They felt that this victory was like a free win. It took them a long time to react and they were overjoyed. What's going on? Ling Shan and the others looked at each other. It was a pity that Lin Yi wasn't there, or he could explain it to them. Maybe she's exhausted too much qi in the first 3 rounds, and her stamina is low. Xianijia looked at them and said thoughtfully, other than the silent Bing Wuqing, he should be the one who could see the situation the most, other than Lung Lung and Duanmu Yu. He was right. Lung Lung's strength was far from being consolidated, because of the 2 consecutive breakthroughs in the first 2 rounds. Moreover, she used the extreme version of prison formation for the first time against Xue Jianfeng in the last round. This was a trump card that consumed a lot of qi and stamina. She didn't feel anything because she was excited at that time, but now the drawbacks were fully manifested. If she had been able to use prison drawing, there would have been almost no reason for her to lose the match just now. However, because she did not have enough true qi, she had a very obvious flaw when she used this move, which was why her opponent had turned defeat into victory. It was the same for Duanmu Yu. Whether it was falling leaves signifying autumn or a mountain leaf, they were both powerful moves that consumed a lot of qi and stamina. Moreover, every time she used it in a short period of time, it would consume more than the last time. Moreover, her opponent wasn't weak, so it was understandable that she lost in the end. The 2 girls behaved the same after losing the battle. They didn't say a word, and walked to an empty space at the side and began to meditate to recover their qi. Both of them had 2 wins and 2 losses now. The next 5th round of the competition would directly affect their future, so they had to make the best use of their time to recuperate and prepare for the last battle. Coincidentally, since Lung Lung and Duanmu Yu lost one after another, the 4th round of the competition seemed to be cursed. All kinds of dark horses kept appearing one after another. They obviously had the upper hand in strength, but they kept failing miserably. It was so strange. Xianijia wasn't surprised about this. As a senior elder of the Green Cloud sect in the North Island, he had presided over at least 80, if not 100, big or small competitions. He knew that in the middle and late stage of the competition, a lot of physical and qi would be consumed, and the spirit would unconsciously relax due to exhaustion. Therefore, it was the easiest time for accidents to happen. It wasn't strange for dark horses to appear again and again. A day later, it was finally the turn of the group in the early stage of the foundation establishment realm in the 4th round of the competition. As the number of participating disciples decreased significantly due to various reasons, the process of the competition sped up a lot. The first round still needed 2 whole days to finish, but in the 4th round, it only took less than a day to finish all the previous matches. If Xianijia hadn't deliberately left some time for everyone to rest and recuperate between each group's matches, the time would be even shorter. After all, not only the number of matches was far less than before, but because everyone deliberately reduced the probing, the time of each match was also greatly shortened. This was a matter of course. Chapter 5200. Lin Yi said he was going to train Ziyu for 2 days, but it wasn't even 2 days and it was already time to draw lots. Didn't that mean that they'd forfeit and be eliminated? But it's too late now, right? Man, we've miscalculated. Yu Bing frowned. They should have realized this a long time ago, but because they trusted Linny too much, they thought that something like this would be within Linny's calculations. They forgot that the timing wasn't controllable, and even Linny couldn't have predicted that it would be the Foundation Establishment Group's turn so soon. No matter what, I'll go find Boss and the others now. As long as I don't get the first match, it should be fine. My luck shouldn't be that bad, right? Chintian left. But before he could take 2 steps, Xianijia announced, Foundation Establishment Early Phase, First Match, Common Worlding Ziyu against Snow Sword Sex Luo Shasheng. Huh, what's going on? Chintian almost fell flat on his face, and Lingshan and the others all had a pained expression on their faces. What should they do? At this time, Luo Shasheng was already walking onto the stage with a ferocious aura, looking at Lingshan and the others with a vicious smile. He'd lost to Lingshan's miraculous counterattack in the first round, and Lingshan's attack had indeed hit his vitals, but it wasn't that heavy. Luo Shasheng had already recovered by the time the second round started, and he didn't meet anyone from Lin Yi's group in the next 3 rounds. Among all the Foundation Establishment disciples from the Archaic Alliance, Luo Shasheng's strength wasn't top-notch, but he was still a disciple of the Snow Sword sect who could control the snow aspect. His strength wasn't to be underestimated, and as long as his luck wasn't too bad, he could beat most of his opponents. But perhaps because of Lingshan, Luo Shasheng's strength had recovered, but his condition was affected quite a bit. He won 1 and lost 1 in the next 2 rounds, and while he wasn't directly eliminated, he had 1 foot on the edge of a cliff. There was no going back now. What a coincidence. It's a shame that it's not Lingshan, but at least it gives me a chance to get my revenge. I can't wait. Luo Shasheng looked at Lingshan a little regretful. He couldn't accept losing to Lingshan like that in the first round, and he'd been dreaming of meeting Lingshan again in the next few rounds, but he didn't have the chance. He could only vent his anger on Ziyu now. Lingshan and the others glared at him furiously. If it weren't for the tournament, they'd definitely teach this guy a lesson. If it weren't for Lingshan going easy on him last time, he'd be a dead man by now. How dare he talk big like that? That was what he said, but it'd be a lie to say that he wasn't worried at all. With Ziyu's performance in the last few fights, this Luo Shisheng wouldn't stand a chance against her. Especially since this guy had a grudge in his heart. He wouldn't let Ziyu give up so easily. The tournament begins. Disciples, please enter the stage. Xianijia saw that Ziyu wasn't entering the stage, so he turned around to urge her, but he didn't see her anywhere. He'd been interacting with Lingshan's group for the past few months, and he could still recognize her. He blinked. Where's Ziyu? Under normal circumstances, all the disciples would wait at the side, no matter if it was time to go up or not. Even if they won all 3 fights and got the right to go up early, other than the heavily injured ones, most of them would stay here to watch the others fight. This was the first time someone like Ziyu, who was clearly uninjured, had disappeared. Lingshan and the others looked at each other. She's going back for a bit, but she'll be back soon. Please wait for a bit. Then, all right. Xianijia nodded. This might not work if it was someone else, but Ziyu was Lin Yi's follower. She was his senior master after all, and he had to give her some face. Luo Shisheng snorted discontentedly, but he dared not say anything more. He was not a big shot like Swordsmanship. He was merely a disciple in the early stage of Foundation Establishment realm. How would he dare to put on airs in front of Xianijia, a gold core stage master uncle? Therefore he could only endure it. Lingshan and the others breathed a sigh of relief, quickly sending Chantian to inform Linny and Ziyu. However, this place was quite far from the Blue Cloud Sex Island, and they had to row a boat. They wouldn't be able to get there without 2 incense sticks worth of time. Even Xianijia wouldn't be able to waste this much time, so he had to try his best. After the time it took to burn a stick of incense, the other disciples of the Archaic Alliance were getting impatient. If it was a big shot like Linny who made them wait for so long, it would be understandable. However, it was just a weak little girl. Xianijia, as the leader of the team and the judge, was being so biased. Wasn't he being too selfish? Master Xian, we've waited long enough, right? If she doesn't come, are we supposed to keep waiting like this? Luo Shisheng finally asked. Yeah, according to the rules, anyone who doesn't show up on time forfeits. Waiting for an incense stick's worth of time is the limit. The flowers will wilt if we wait any longer. The others all agreed. That's. Xianijia looked at Lingshan and the others, troubled. From his perspective, he had tried his best, and he could only give a helpless expression. Since that's the case, then I'll announce that Ziyu has been late for too long and will forfeit. Before he could finish, Ziyu's voice came from not far away. Sorry, I'm late. That's great. Seeing Lin Yi and Ziyu appear together, Lingshan and the others let out a breath of relief. Even Xianijia was the same. Only Luo Shixing was a little disappointed. He wanted to use this chance to vent his anger on Ziyu, but in comparison, the test was more important. If he could win without any effort, then he'd be able to maintain his peak condition for the 5th round, and he'd have a much higher chance of entering the test. I'll be going then. Ziyu was no longer as nervous as before, smiling confidently as she raised her hand to Lin Yi. Okay, good luck. Lin Yi high-fived her. Chapter 5201. Humph. She's just a flower vase with no strength at all. Where's that confidence coming from? Luo Shixing curled his lips in disdain. Ever since he lost to Lingshan, he'd been paying close attention to Lin Yi's group. After all, they were very likely to be the opponents they'd be drawn against, and he'd seen their performance from start to finish. If it were Lingshan and the others, he'd be worried, but since it was Ziyu, the weakest of them all, there was no need to worry. Ziyu will be fine, right? Lingshan worried. She knew Luo Shixing's strength the best. He wasn't an easy opponent at the early phase of foundation establishment. If she didn't fully grasp the counter moves Lin Yi taught her, she'd have a hard time. Ziyu, she. Lin Yi paused and smiled meaningfully. She's actually quite strong. Lingshan and the others paused, looking at each other. Lin Yi's standards had always been very high, and he'd never even commented on their performance like this before. Could Ziyu be an unparalleled genius for him to say that she was strong? At this time, the battle officially started. What surprised everyone was that Ziyu didn't follow the tactics and counter moves Lin Yi taught them, choosing to go on the offensive right from the start. This scene didn't just surprise everyone. Even Luo Shixing was shocked. But then he sneered. If you want to take the initiative, then you need to have the strength to do so. Do you have it? Luo Shixing smiled coldly, and his signature weapon, the slaughter blade, came slashing down. Ziyu, however, was expecting it and dodged to the side, throwing a punch at his face. Luo Shixing was shocked Ziyu was hitting his life point. How was that possible? If it was the snow-killing style, the most famous style of the snow sword faction, it was still acceptable for someone to lock onto his vital point. However, the traceless snow that he was using now was just an inconspicuous style. How could this woman have predicted it? She couldn't say that it was her spontaneous reaction, could she? That reaction speed was just too astonishing. Moreover, could an ordinary person study the moves of the Snow Sword School so thoroughly? Even the disciples of the Snow Sword School themselves might not be able to lock onto the vital points of the moves so quickly, right? Luckily, Traceless Snow Ground's flaw wasn't as obvious as Snow Kill, and Luo Shixing quickly changed his move. Ziyu didn't, still hitting the same spot, but Luo Shixing easily blocked it. Does this woman not know how to be flexible? Luo Shixing paused, and before he could react, Ziyu followed up with another attack, this one even faster than before. But this time she didn't lock onto the life gate. Luo Shixing quickly blocked again, but he didn't even have time to stop before Ziyu's third attack came even faster. She didn't lock onto the life gate as well, and it looked like a normal body part. Why did she choose such unimportant positions? What is this woman doing? Luo Shixing was a bit stunned. Ziyu's attacks were abnormally fast, but they were easy to block. There was no threat at all. It was just that he had failed against Lingshan before, and even if Luo Shixing looked down on Ziyu from the bottom of his heart, he didn't dare let his guard down against this random series of attacks. With the mentality of playing it safe, he started to defend. 7 to 8 moves in a row was the same, and Luo Shixing was getting impatient. He'd seen through Ziyu already, and as weak as she was, everything before was just a bluff. With a thought, Luo Shixing started to counterattack, but before he could even do it, Ziyu was already going for his life gate. He almost pissed his pants going back to his defensive stance. This is... Lingshan was a bit weirded looking at Ziyu's actions. She seemed to be using the counter moves Lin Yi taught her, but not completely. Other than the first move and this one, the rest weren't specific to the Snow Sword sect. Other than the Snow Sword sect, Ziyu seems to be using the counter moves of the other ancient sects as well. Boss, what's going on? Yu Bing finally saw what was going on and asked softly. Chen Tian and the others came to a realization. No wonder Ziyu's moves looked so familiar. They were the moves of the ancient sects, but they were all mixed together, so it didn't look like they belonged to the same sect. As you can see, it's a mixed version of the ancient sect's counter moves. Linny smiled. This was something he'd come up with just for Ziyu, since she'd shown that she was a test addict. Getting her to use a counter move on the spot like the others was a very hard thing to do, and so he came up with this idea. He didn't need to think too much about it. He just needed to use all the moves in the sparring, and it'd be much easier that way. But is this going to work? Lingshan said. Confused, Yu did seem to be able to scare the opponent, but she didn't hurt him at all. She'd be seen through sooner or later anyway, and this stance was just a waste of chi and stamina. She didn't see any chance of winning at all. Yeah, when you're not as strong as the opponent, it's very easy to see through Ziyu's moves, so you have to defend and counterattack. Isn't that what you taught us, boss? Chen Tian said. That's normal, but take a good look at Ziyu's movements. Linny reminded. Everyone looked closely at Ziyu's performance, and Yu Bing reacted after a while. She seems to be lowering the power of her moves to increase her speed. More accurately, she has no choice but to lower the power of her moves. That's right. As the saying goes, there's nothing that can't be defeated by speed. Speed doesn't just refer to the speed of one's movements, but also the speed of one's attacks. When the speed of one's attacks reaches a certain level, the opponent won't be able to react in time, achieving the goal of attacking instead of defending. So, I taught her a whole new fighting style, Instant Strike. Chapter 5202. Instant Strike. Everyone was shocked. Yes, it's a fighting style that ignores everything else and focuses on speed. Once you get caught up in a fight like this, you won't be able to fight back normally. You'll only be able to attack halfway, and the opponent will have already attacked. Linny said. Wow, that sounds really strong. Everyone was shocked, but then they started complaining. Boss is too biased, isn't he? He's only teaching Ziyu something this strong and not us. Haha, I can teach you anytime if you want, but it's just a fighting style. It's not suitable for everyone. Linny said as he looked at Ziyu. He didn't know much about the others, but this girl's speed was surprisingly fast, as if she was born for instant strike. The two were still fighting, and it was as Linny said, Luo Shashing was completely locked down by Ziyu. His life killer blade couldn't unleash its full power when he was in close range, and Ziyu was using a close-range instant attack. Even if it was just a fledgling form, it was enough to catch someone off guard for a foundation establishment practitioner like that. Instant strike really is effective. That guy can't find a chance to fight back at all. He's really being led by the nose. Qintian's eyes lit up. Yu Bing, however, still frowned. That's true, but Ziyu isn't really threatening him yet. He'll run out of stamina soon, won't he? Instant strike is a fighting style that allows you to gain the upper hand as long as you're in close range. But the downside is that each attack will be greatly weakened, and the stamina and chi will be used up quickly. It's not suitable for a long fight. Linny said. Doesn't that mean Ziyu's in danger? Lingshan said worriedly. You're wrong. I suddenly realized that Ziyu has a very strong trait yesterday, very suitable for instant strike. You'll understand if you keep watching. Linny smiled mysteriously. A very strong trait? Everyone paused, staring at Ziyu's performance. They didn't notice anything out of the ordinary, but slowly their faces changed. This fight had been going on for the time it takes to burn a stick of incense, and with Ziyu's speed, she shouldn't be able to hold on much longer. Her attacks should be slowing down, but she was acting the exact opposite. Not only that, but from Luo Shashing's movements, his attacks were much stronger than before. How could that be? Everyone was puzzled. The more he fights, the stronger he gets. Ziyu seems to have this type of constitution. Linny explained with a smile. Normal people would get weaker and weaker as they used up their stamina, but there was a type of person who could unleash strength far beyond normal. Ziyu looked weak and petite, but she had this kind of strong body. It wasn't a coincidence that she was a delinquent girl in the past. It was in her genes. A constitution that can unleash strength in the later stages. Everyone was shocked. Just when they were shocked, The fight had reached its climax. As Ziyu's attacks got faster and faster, her attacks got stronger and stronger, and Luo Shasheng, who had been on the defensive all this time, was starting to lose his strength. In just a short period of time he'd already been hit 5 times. Even though his protective Zhenqi had blocked most of the power, he had still accumulated quite a bit of damage from being hit by the consecutive attacks. At this moment he was already slightly injured. Even though the injury was not serious, it had more or less affected his movements. This was the start of a vicious cycle. It looks like the result will be out soon. Xianijia nodded, a little surprised. The situation was clear now. Ziyu's unexpected performance had given her the upper hand, and if Luo Shasheng didn't bring out a powerful counterattack, the battle would be over soon. Luo Shasheng was well aware of this fact. Unfortunately, this was the first time he had seen a close-range instantaneous attack. For a moment he didn't know how to respond. Facing such a fast-paced close-range attack, he couldn't even use a complete move, let alone counterattack. To be defeated by a weak little girl, how could such a stupid thing happen to me? Seeing that he was being forced into a corner step by step, Luo Shasheng was finally ready to risk everything. Lin Yi's lips curled up at this. Close-range attack was a very strong fighting style, but it wasn't invincible. As long as he chose the right strategy, he'd be able to deal with it. There were 2 things he needed to do in order to deal with a close-range attack. 1, he couldn't let the opponent get close to him easily, and 2, he had to open up the distance as soon as the opponent got close, even if he had to pay the price of getting hurt. However, Luo Shasheng didn't do these 2 things at all. He didn't even realize that risking everything at this time coincided with the second point. Unfortunately, it was already too late. Without enough patience and means, he could only rely on a moment of desperation to break through. Close combat, a fighting method that was highly respected on Heaven Stage Island, was simply too weak. Shaoxing didn't think too much in the situation, and used the snow kill style all of a sudden. Ever since he lost to Lingshan in the first round, the weakness of this signature move of the Snowsword School was known to everyone, and so he had to be extremely careful every time he used it, or he'd be countered easily. The spectators were speechless. All Ziyu had to do now was attack his throat, the obvious opening, and the fight would be over. This wasn't an easy thing to do under normal circumstances, but with Ziyu's close-range skills, seizing the opportunity was a piece of cake. But Ziyu didn't seem to care at all, continuing her rhythm, attacking all parts of Luo Shasheng's body except the throat. This little girl actually saw through it? Instead of being happy, Luo Shasheng was shocked. His desperate move was just a facade. He wanted to use the snow-killing style to bait his opponent. In fact, he did not intend to use the snow-killing style at all. From the moment he started to use it, he was ready to change his move. Chapter 5203. As for whether or not Ziyu herself noticed it, that wasn't certain. But even if she didn't, she wouldn't care. After all, she was the type that focused on controlling the initiative. Even if it meant missing the opponent's opening, she couldn't follow the opponent's rhythm, unless she had absolute confidence in killing them in one hit. This was the first rule Lin Yi emphasized when he taught her how to do it. Bam! Just as Luo Shasheng was playing around, Ziyu's barrage of attacks knocked him down on the ground. Even so, she didn't stop, continuing her attacks on him without any intention of holding back. How cruel! Everyone's eyelids twitched. As long as Luo Shasheng didn't admit defeat or faint, the battle wasn't over yet. Even if he was knocked down, he could still chase after him. But normally, people would stop when the fight was over, and it was rare to see someone like Ziyu chasing after him. Even Lin Yi and the others felt a chill running down their spine. As expected, Ziyu was a ruthless person deep down in her bones. After a while, he looked at Luo Shasheng, who was about to be beaten to death without a chance to fight back, and Xianijia couldn't watch it anymore. Alright, this duel ends here. I declare Ziyu the winner, and Luo Shasheng 1 win, 3 losses. He's eliminated. That's it? Ziyu pulled her hand back, still looking like she hadn't had enough yet. That's enough, save some strength for the next round. Lin Yi couldn't help but sweat as he looked at the pitiful Luo Shasheng on the ground. Meeting an opponent like Ziyu really was the worst thing he'd ever experienced in his life. Alright, but Lin Yi bro, the close-range attack you taught me is really good. I feel like I'm burning up, I can't stop. Ziyu hugged Lin Yi's arm excitedly. Everyone smiled when they heard this. This was probably not the effect of the instant close-range attack, but purely due to her own special physique. Ziyu's victory was a good start for everyone, and Yu Bing, Xiaobo, and the others all passed as expected. They all got the right to enter the Archean trials with 3 wins and 1 loss. With this, Lin Yi's group only had 2 people left to fight in the 5th round, Ziyu and Colt. But with Ziyu's current condition, there shouldn't be anything to worry about in the next round. At least at the Foundation establishment level, close-range attack was a very troublesome way of fighting. Most people wouldn't be able to react in time, and without the guidance of a master, no one would be able to block Ziyu's close-range attack. Right now, Leng Leng was the one who was a little worried. Although she was very strong now, not only did she possess the Shattered Ice physique, but she had also developed a powerful move such as prison drawing. She had just advanced to the Foundation perfected stage. At the same time, she was facing the predicament of insufficient vital energy. If she could not recover in time, she might repeat the mistakes of the 4th round. That would be troublesome. Linny bro, why don't you give Kultsis a private training session too? Wouldn't that be great? Ziyu suggested. She was a living example, and with Lin Yi's level and judgment, the effect of a private training was unquestionable. Sure. Lin Yi nodded and turned to look at Leng Leng. Based on the current situation, there's still a lot of room for improvement, whether it's prison formation or other aspects. We should be able to gain something with targeted special training. What do you think? That. Colt hesitated and shook her head firmly. Don't bite off more than you can chew. I haven't even stabilized my Foundation establishment level yet, and I haven't mastered ground prison yet, so I think we should leave the training for later. This time I want to overcome it with my own hard work. Alright then, I believe you. Good luck. Lin Yi patted her shoulder lightly. Although it was a little risky to do so, he felt very gratified. Just like what Colt had said, it was better not to bite off more than one could chew. It was commendable for her to realize this. In the 5th round of the trial, no one chose to challenge someone of a higher level. After all, those who stayed until this round were disciples who had gone through 4 rounds of intense battles, with 2 wins and 2 losses. There was no room for accidents anymore. Instead of choosing to challenge someone of a higher level, they might as well participate in the 5th round. At least this way the difficulty would be lower, and they would have a higher chance of qualifying for the archaic trial. There were only 4 Foundation establishment level complete practitioners left, and when Xi and Ijia drew out the first group, everyone was shocked. Their eyes focused on the 2 in the field. Cold against Duanmu Yu. Oh, looks like I've gotten myself into a good show. Xue Jianfeng smiled with great interest. After a few days of recuperation, the frostbite left by Cold's extreme version of confinement prison had completely healed. However, because of this, he couldn't be present to supervise the battle these few days. Hence, he couldn't specifically target Lin Yi's group. Otherwise, they wouldn't have passed so smoothly. Fortunately, the result of the draw did not disappoint him. Although he had to admit that Cold's strength was indeed not to be underestimated, especially that prison drawing was even more shocking. It was difficult for an average master of the same level to contend against it. However, Duanmu Yu was not an ordinary character. Moreover, from the previous match, Colt's condition was not considered good. The odds of winning against Duanmu Yu in this match was not high. If Duanmu Yu could eliminate Colt, although it was barely satisfactory for Xue Jianfeng, it could be considered as a consolation. At this moment, not only Xue Jianfeng, but the rest of the crowd also revealed an expression of watching a good show. After all, this was a rare showdown. Both sides were the hot topic, especially since this was the final showdown. No matter what the result was, one side was bound to be eliminated on the spot. Who would it be? Please. Colt took the lead and bowed slightly to Duanmu Yu. Please. Duanmu Yu, on the other hand, made a gesture of invitation. She looked calm and composed on the surface, but she was secretly on guard in her heart. She warned herself that no matter what, she could not let the opponent use the painted confinement. Even Xue Jianfeng, a beginner-stage gold core expert, almost suffered a calamity. If she was the one trapped, then everything would be over. After the greeting, the atmosphere in the field suddenly began to become extremely tense. The crowd at the side did not even dare to breathe, quietly waiting for the 2 to officially start. Chapter 5204. She wants to end the fight quickly? Duan Muyu was shocked, but she was not surprised. Since she had already run out of true qi in the previous round, it was impossible for her to fully recover even after 2 days of rest. Especially when facing a strong opponent, ending the battle as soon as possible could be said to be the only choice. In fact, it wasn't just Cold. Duan Muyu had the same thought. She was facing the same predicament as Cold. If she couldn't think of a way to end the fight quickly, it would be hard to predict how the situation would develop. Bam! Both of them launched their kicks at the same time, but neither of them touched the other because they were aiming for the other's vitals. This had nothing to do with the Mingmen of the moves. It was a direct way of exchanging lives for lives. Everyone gasped in unison, stunned. Even if the outcome of this fight was directly related to the qualification to enter the Archean trials, there was no need to fight so desperately right from the start, was there? Ling Shan and the others' hearts skipped a beat. Even Linny couldn't help but raise an eyebrow. Fortunately, both of them didn't really exchange lives for lives. They both chose to pull back their legs at the last moment. Just when everyone let out a sigh of relief, the same scene happened again. Everyone's hearts were in their throats again. They only relaxed when the two of them separated again. It was like a roller coaster. This isn't good. I'm afraid it'll go against the strategy of ending the fight quickly if this goes on. Duan Muyu looked at Cold, who was charging at her with a serious face. She frowned as she used the method of exchanging lives for lives to force her to retreat. She had no other choice. She didn't dare to take Cold's moves head-on because she was afraid of the legendary Ice Shatter physique. Otherwise, even if she had chi protection, she would be gradually affected. Once her speed was limited, she would be trapped. Therefore, she could only use such a method to force Cold to retreat. However, it would gradually evolve into a battle of physical strength and vital energy. The situation would go out of control after a while. If the situation was still the same, she might not be able to hold back her attack, and it would really turn into a mutual destruction. Seeing that Cold was attacking again, Duan Muyu changed her strategy. A withered leaf fell from her palm and she disappeared. The bleak autumn atmosphere instantly swept across the field. The fall of a leaf signified the beginning of autumn. Here comes the show. Everyone's spirits were lifted. According to Duan Muyu's previous habits, after falling leaves indicates autumn, would be followed by a leaf like a mountain, and the winner would be decided soon. Unexpectedly, at the same moment, a bone-chilling coldness enveloped the entire place, and the source was Lung Lung. Prison on the ground? Everyone was shocked again, and they looked at each other. But we can't even see Duan Muyu's figure. Even so, he can still use prison of drawn ground? Furthermore, it covers such a large area. Isn't this too exaggerated? Although it's a prison with herself as the target. Cold is really going all out this time. Linny could not help but smile when he saw that. In theory, prison on the ground would only be used when the opponent was locked. However, under special circumstances, it could also target Cold herself like what she was doing now. The shattered ice constitution had a magnifying effect on this, which was enough to expand the range of prison on the ground by several times. However, even Cold herself would suffer from frostbite, just that it would not be as serious as the average person. Everyone had yet to understand what was going on, but for safety's sake, Xianijia once again led the crowd to retreat a good distance. Everyone only stopped when they were almost at the shore, for fear of being accidentally hurt by Cold's prison on the ground. Cold's surroundings were empty, and not a single figure could be found within a radius of 100 meters. However, everyone knew that Duan Muyu must be hiding in this open space, waiting for the opportunity to kill in one hit. However, where was she? Everyone, including Xianijia, was trying their best to find Duan Muyu's figure. However, it was destined to be useless. Duan Muyu had used it at least 3 times in the first 4 rounds of the competition. Unless she took the initiative to show herself, otherwise even a beginner gold core expert like Xianijia would not be able to locate her position. If it was really that easy to be broken, Yi Luoji of Autumn would not have become the signature of Yiling sect. Of course, Linny was the only exception. Yi Luoji of Autumn could deceive beginner gold core experts, but it would be too fake to deceive someone at his level. It was a pity that Cold was not Linny. Everyone could not detect Duan Muyu's position, and neither could she. That was why she used prison on herself. Otherwise, she would not have to take such a risk. This cold is really strong. Duan Muyu frowned when she saw this scene. She had indeed concealed herself with the help of the fallen leaves of autumn, but she could only hide from the other party's senses. She could clearly feel the bone-chilling coldness. In fact, because of the bleak autumn, she could feel it much more clearly than others. This bone-chilling coldness could really kill someone. This was not surprising. What really surprised Duan Muyu was that the power of prison on the ground could be raised to such a level in just 3 moves. It almost completely overturned her previous judgment. Duan Muyu was definitely one of the people who observed the battle between Cold and Xue Jianfeng the most attentively. After all, both of them were very likely to be strong opponents that she would have to face. As the leading senior sister of Yiling sect, Duan Muyu's observation skills were absolutely top-notch. This was the minimum requirement to enter Yiling sect. Although she had only seen it once, she could already see some of the tricks of prison on the ground. Duan Muyu knew very well that this was a powerful killer move that needed to be laid down. The more laid down, the more powerful it would be. It was also because of this judgment that Duan Muyu was very determined to end the battle quickly from the beginning. Not only could she avoid the risk of overdrafting her vital energy and physical strength, but she could also restrain her opponent's most feared prison on the ground. It was killing 2 birds with 1 stone. If it was not for the fact that her Yi Luoji of Autumn also needed a certain amount of time to accumulate, Duan Muyu would definitely have used it immediately. Of course, it was within the acceptable range if she could only deal with her opponent for 3 moves. However, she did not expect Cold's prison on the ground to reach such a level after only 3 moves. It was even stronger than when she was fighting against Xue Jianfeng. In that case, could it be that her previous judgment was completely wrong? Duan Muyu's confidence could not help but waver. After all her speculations were based on appearances. To be honest, it was not easy to come to such a conclusion after only 1 observation. Unfortunately, she did not know the principle of prison on the ground. Chapter 5205. Even so, Duan Muyu did not reveal any flaws. She adjusted her strategy in an instant and prepared to snatch the attack. Falling leaves of autumn and 1 mountain-like leaf, this was the most common and most threatening combo move. It was also Duan Muyu's original plan. However, just like the falling leaves of autumn, this powerful and overbearing move needed time to charge up. Everyone knew about this routine, but it was still impossible to defend against it because no one knew where and when the attack of 1 mountain-like leaf would come from. The problem now was that she was affected by the bone-chilling cold of the painted ground prison. Duan Muyu discovered that the vital energy in her body was beginning to show signs of stagnation. If this continued, she would not be able to use her mountain leaf again. Instead of sitting on the ground and waiting for death, she might as well give it her all. A thin iron leaf appeared above Lung Lung's head out of thin air. It pressed down with an incomparably heavy and majestic aura. 1 mountain-like leaf. Boom! The iron leaf was only the size of a palm, but it left a clear leaf print the size of half a basketball court on the ground. The depth of the print was as high as a person's height. It was astounding. Ah! Ling Shan and the others screamed when they saw this. Didn't this mean that Lung Lung was crushed to death by the 1 mountain-like leaf? However, they immediately breathed a sigh of relief because Lung Lung had already rushed out from the leaf print. Although she was obviously injured, judging from her current state, the injury should not be too serious. Is this guy made of iron? Someone could not help but exclaim. The others were also confused. They had seen the power of 1 mountain-like leaf with their own eyes. A foundation perfection perfected expert was blown away on the spot. Even if Lung Lung's strength was stronger than a foundation perfection perfected expert, she should not be able to jump around after taking on the 1 mountain-like leaf. This was too ridiculous. Xue Jianfeng snorted when he heard that. Most people could not understand the scene just now, but as a Golden Core Realm expert he saw it clearly. Duan Muyu's 1 mountain-like leaf was indeed powerful. A normal foundation perfection perfected expert would be courting death if he took it head-on. It was the same for Lung Lung. However, Cold Lung did not take the attack head-on. Instead, she had already stepped on the ground and shrunk herself before the mountain-like leaf came crashing down. Instead of saying that the mountain-like leaf's power had landed on her body, it would be more accurate to say that most of the power had been absorbed by the ground. That was why she was able to sustain such a light injury. Xue Jianfeng secretly felt that it was a pity. He couldn't wait for Cold to be beaten to death by Duan Muyu. He didn't expect that she actually escaped this calamity. Oh no! Duan Muyu's heart skipped a beat. She had already used up most of her true chi against knowledge of the autumn and mountain of fallen leaves. She had bet most of her chips on this. At the very least, she had to severely injure her opponent before she could take control of the situation. An opening! Lung Lung's eyes lit up. Without any hesitation, she rushed forward and gave him a head-on kick. With a bang, Duan Muyu was sent flying. What a pity! Lin Yi shook his head slightly as he witnessed the scene. Lung Lung had grasped the opportunity very well. Duan Muyu's momentary absent-mindedness had indeed exposed a small opening. However, Lung Lung was affected by her prison drawing, so her speed was obviously slower than usual. This gave her opponent a chance to defend himself hastily. Otherwise, the outcome of the battle would have been decided. Lung Lung also felt that it was a pity. Duan Muyu, on the other hand, could not help but secretly feel lucky. Even though she had already used her arms to block her chest before the opponent's kick landed on her, and her protective chi had been strengthened to its peak in an instant, she still received quite a bit of impact. A thin layer of frost was left on both of her arms. In a situation like this, the longer the fight dragged on, the greater the effect of the confinement spell would be. Her flaw earlier was also affected by the confinement spell. After receiving Cold Lung's kick head-on, the freezing effect was magnified infinitely. The white frost was the symbol. At this moment, she could not even feel the existence of both her arms. They were completely frozen. Phew! Lung Lung let out a long breath upon seeing the situation. She was about to give her opponent the final blow. Truth be told, even she could not withstand the powerful freezing effect of the prison drawing. If she continued to delay, she would probably follow in her opponent's footsteps. Should I admit defeat? Lung Lung suddenly stopped moving. There was no enmity between her and Duan Muyu. If it was not necessary, she did not want to deal a heavy blow. Otherwise, it would not only be a matter of elimination for Duan Muyu. It was unknown whether he could fully recover from the severe injury. If there were any sequelae because of this, it would be an endless trouble. No one knew the horror of the prison drawing better than herself. This degree of frostbite was not something that could be easily cured. What nonsense are you talking about? Duan Muyu glanced at her. A trace of determination suddenly flashed across her eyes. The battle has just begun, isn't it? As she spoke, a withered leaf slowly slid out from her palm. Everyone could not help but look at each other when they saw it. Was Duan Muyu still thinking of turning the tables with the falling leaves in autumn? Although his perseverance was commendable, it was too unrealistic, right? Lung Lung was also very puzzled. However, she reacted quickly. From her standpoint, it was already benevolent of her to give her opponent the chance to admit defeat. Since Duan Muyu insisted on fighting till the end, she could only fulfill his wish. Without another word, Lung Lung immediately gave her opponent the final blow. At this moment, both of Duan Muyu's arms were frozen numb. Even the movement of slipping out from the withered leaf seemed very clumsy, let alone fighting back. However, before Lung Lung could land her attack, Duan Muyu's body suddenly erupted with an incomparably strong vitality. As if it had materialized, his entire body was emitting a dazzling light. The withered leaf has turned green? Lin Yi looked at the withered leaf that was slowly falling to the ground in astonishment. At this moment, it had turned emerald green and was full of vitality. This is the withered leaf rejuvenation. Xianijia exclaimed. No wonder he, the junior uncle who led the team at the early stage of the Gold Core Realm, was so shocked. In fact, not only him, even Bing Wuqing was visibly moved when she saw this scene. The withered leaf rejuvenation, like the falling leaves in autumn, was one of the few symbolic moves of the Yiling sect. However, it was never something that a foundation-building disciple could master. In theory, only a gold core expert could master it. No one would have thought that Duan Muyu, who was only at the foundation-building great completion, had already mastered this move. In this way, even if this woman's strength and potential were not comparable to the shocking geniuses like Lung Lung and Ling Tianyu, there was not much difference. Chapter 5206. Burning her life force in advance, and at the same time, a 3-month-long period of weakness. This is the price of rejuvenating withered leaves. She actually went this far just for a duel. Is this woman crazy? Bing Wuqing could not understand. In the eyes of a person who respected absolute rationality, Duan Muyu's actions were meaningless. Indeed, it was extremely likely that Duan Muyu would be able to win this battle by relying on the heaven-defying recovery effect of spring withered leaves. However, so what if she obtained the qualifications to participate in the primeval trials? There were less than 2 months left until the primeval trials. In other words, she would be in a weakened state for at least a month, and participating in the primeval trials in such a state was simply courting death. Instead of that, she might as well admit defeat. Even a child could distinguish the pros and cons of this. Was it just a momentary impulse? In fact, it was no wonder that Bing Wuqing could not understand. Even after her dantian was destroyed by Lin Dongfang, she had always maintained sufficient rationality. A momentary impulse was an experience she had never experienced before, so naturally she could not understand. However, Xianijia could understand Duan Muyu's feelings. This was probably not a momentary impulse, but something she had long planned. Once the situation turned bad, she would use rejuvenating withered leaves and win at all costs. For Duan Muyu, this was not just because of the primordial trial qualification. More importantly, it was related to the reputation of the entire Yiling sect. She was the leading senior sister of the Yiling sect. If she could not even get the minimum qualification for the trial, wouldn't it be a disgrace to the entire Yiling sect? For the sake of the Yiling sect, Duan Muyu could not lose this duel no matter what. Absolutely not. Bystanders could see things clearly, but Lung Lung had never seen rejuvenating withered leaves before. Before she came to the secular world to train, she was only in the early stage of foundation establishment. Whether it was experience or strength, she was far from her level. In addition, she was from the always mysterious Yiling sect. Before this, she had never even heard of rejuvenating withered leaves, so she was at a loss for what to do. Bang! This time it was Lung Lung who was sent flying. Duan Muyu, who had recovered to his peak state in an instant, was unstoppable. Even without a powerful move like a mountain-like leaf, Lung Lung, who had consumed a lot of energy, was no longer as strong as she wished. Immediately after that, Duan Muyu did not let Cold Lung have the upper hand. He did not give Cold Lung any chance to react at all as he followed up with a series of fierce attacks. Cold Lung was completely at a disadvantage. Xianijia felt a little strange as he watched the two of them intertwining with each other. He could not help but mumble, "Since you've recovered to your peak state with rejuvenation, you should have used powerful moves like Falling Leaves of Autumn and Mountainous Leaf to end the battle as soon as possible. Why did you waste so much effort?" Ever since they had witnessed the power of the prison spell, everyone knew that they could not afford to drag out the fight with Cold. Otherwise, the longer the fight dragged on, the more severe the frost damage they would suffer. Duan Muyu might have the upper hand now, but if he could not defeat Cold in a short time, he might just fail miserably. Duan Muyu must be well aware of this, but she still insisted on choosing this method. Was there any special purpose? 5 more moves. Duan Muyu silently reminded herself in her heart. She was estimating the effects of the prison drawing on her. If this trend continued, she would probably be frozen again in another 5 moves. At that time, she would really be powerless to reverse the situation. 5 more moves. Cold's judgment was the same as hers. As long as she could withstand 5 moves, she would win. With such judgment, the next 5 moves were destined to be thrilling. If the initial exchange of life for life was just a test, then this time it would be the real deal. The eyelids of the bystanders twitched. Both of them were injured every time they exchanged moves, but they maintained the toughest stance. Neither of them backed down. Once they backed down, they would lose. Are they still women? Why are they even more manly than us pure men? The men were sweating. A battle like this should be exciting, but it was a battle between 2 women. They did not know what to say. This battle is unexpectedly exciting. No matter who wins or loses, Cold should be able to benefit a lot. Linny nodded. Although he couldn't bear to watch Lung Lung get hurt, he wouldn't interrupt her as long as her life wasn't in danger. After all, there was nothing in this world that could make someone mature faster than an intense battle like this. In the blink of an eye, the two of them had exchanged 4 moves. There was only 1 move left to the bottom line of the judgment. There's no other way. Duan Muyu clenched her teeth. Her opponent's tenacity was far beyond her expectation. At this point she could no longer hold back. She could only use the last of her vital energy to fight with all her might. One leaf like a mountain. Cold's heart skipped a beat. In her current state, it was already very difficult for her to withstand the previous 4 moves. It was impossible for her to withstand the one leaf like a mountain. More importantly, her frostbite speed was greatly affected by her painted ground imprisonment. She could not dodge it even if she wanted to. There's no other way. Cold said the same words as Duan Muyu. She did not dodge or dodge. She said in a deep voice as she formed a seal with her hands, "Ice prison mirror shatter." As soon as she said that, everyone seemed to hear the sound of a huge ice mirror shattering. Then, not only in the field, but even the entire island's temperature suddenly dropped by a large margin, sending chills down everyone's spine. In the blink of an eye, the initially intense and explosive scene suddenly froze. The mountain-like leaf's powerful attack came to an abrupt halt. Cold and Duan Muyu did not make any follow-up moves at the same time because both of them were frozen stiff. This. Xianijia looked at the scene with his mouth agape. He could not utter a proper sentence. Needless to say, the rest of them were dumbfounded and speechless for a long time. I didn't expect her to use the ice prison mirror. This is really. Linny was also a little shocked and did not know what to say. The ice prison mirror was the follow-up and advanced move of the painted ground imprisonment. The principle was to instantly erupt the bone-chilling coldness of the painted ground imprisonment in a more threatening way. However, as Cold had yet to fully master the painted ground imprisonment, it was only a preliminary idea in Lin Yi's mind. He had yet to figure out the specific way of circulating vital energy. He did not expect Cold to use it directly. Apart from her shocking innate talent, this girl's guts were also boundlessly big. It seems that both of them are frozen stiff and unable to move. Let's announce the result as soon as possible. Otherwise, there will be repercussions if they are frozen for too long. That'll be troublesome, said Linny to Xianijia. Chapter 5207. Although Cold and Duan Muyu had lost their ability to move at the same time, both of them were still conscious. It seemed like they were desperately mobilizing the vital qi in their bodies. Under such circumstances, whoever could stand up first would be the winner. As long as they waited patiently, there would definitely be a result. However, it was as Linny had said, if they dragged it on like this, both of them would suffer from side effects from the cold. Compared to the outcome of this battle, the two of them were clearly more important. In this case, the result would be a big problem. After all, there had never been a tie in the trial competition. Moreover, this battle was directly related to the qualification for the Archean trial. Whoever lost would be directly eliminated. Even Xianijia could not come to a conclusion so easily. Needless to say, of course we'll wait for them to stand up on their own. Xue Jianfeng snorted coldly. He did not care about Duan Muyu, but it would be best if he could take this opportunity to cripple Cold. That's impossible. Both Cold and Duan Muyu are genius disciples with outstanding aptitudes. If something really happens to them, let alone Yi Ling sect, even the upper echelons of your Snow Sword sect might not agree to it. Xianijia refuted immediately and said in a deep voice, I'm the person in charge of this trial competition. I have the right to make decisions on the spot. I can't do something as stupid as letting them freeze to death. Xue Jianfeng choked. Xianijia had the absolute right to speak, which he could not compete with. He could only take a step back and said, Then what do you want to do? You're not siding with Cold, are you? Although she's from my Snow Sword sect, it's obvious that Duan Muyu had the upper hand earlier. For the sake of fairness, I think Duan Muyu should be the winner. Xianijia was speechless. Of course he was siding with Cold. However, the situation just now was exactly as Xue Jianfeng said. If Cold won, not only would Duan Muyu not agree, but the others would also say that he was sitting on the wrong seat. I don't think so. Why don't you think about who performed the shattered ice prison mirror? If it wasn't for the power of the shattered ice prison mirror, it wouldn't have caused such a situation. No matter how you look at it, it should be considered as Cold's counterattack. Linny immediately stood up and argued. Since it was related to Cold's qualification for the Archean trial, he naturally would not sit idly by. Reactive strike? You even froze yourself to this state. Do you want me to die of laughter? Xue Jianfeng snorted disdainfully. If it's that funny, why aren't you dying from laughing? Ziyu stuck her tongue out. You. Xue Jianfeng's eyes turned cold, and he subconsciously wanted to make a move to teach this stinky girl, who didn't know the immensity of heaven and earth, a lesson. In the end, Lin Yi's stare made his hair stand on end, and he could only resentfully put away this thought. He muttered in his heart, this guy is clearly only at the Great Circle of Foundation establishment, so why does he have such a frightening aura? Since everyone has their reasons, why don't we all vote together? Each leading senior brother from each sect has 1 vote. Whoever gets the most votes will be the winner, Xianijia said after thinking for a while. I have no objections. Let's let them start healing then. Lin Yi looked at him. If Xianijia was a little more daring, he'd definitely go against everyone's opinions and not use this kind of method to smooth things over. It looked like he didn't offend anyone, but in reality he wasn't getting any favors from either side. The only good thing was that even if the Archean Alliance wanted to pursue the matter, he wouldn't have to take responsibility. After all, this was public opinion. It couldn't be helped. Xianijia was just that kind of person. He looked honest but was actually very sly. He was easy to talk to normally, but when it came to a critical moment, all he could do was to protect himself. Lin Yi wasn't surprised at all. Haha. You really know how to flatter yourself. You're not the leading senior brother of any Archean sect. You don't even have the right to vote. What kind of opinion can you have? Xue Jianfeng took the chance to taunt. Who said I don't? Xianijia snorted and immediately announced, Grandmaster is the most respected person in the Green Cloud sect of the North Island. Of course, Grandmaster has the final say on who the Green Cloud sect of the North Island wants to vote for. He also knew that his suggestion to let everyone vote had unwittingly displeased Lin Yi. At this time, of course, he had to think of a way to remedy the situation. Letting Lin Yi decide was equivalent to voting for Lung Lung in disguise, as a way to express his apology. All right then, I'll vote for Lung Lung, Lin Yi said bluntly. Some people are really mesmerized by lust, but I'm different. In this case, of course, we have to listen to the public opinion. The Snow Sword faction votes for Duan Muyu, Xue Jianfeng said tit for tat. When he said this, he completely forgot about the existence of Bing Wuqing. It should be known that Bing Wuqing was above him in both strength and status. Moreover, Bing Wuqing's identity in the secular world was the Snow Sword faction's leading senior uncle. She should be the one to make the decision, not Xue Jianfeng. Feeling a chill on his back, Xue Jianfeng suddenly reacted and hurriedly tried to salvage the situation. Grandmaster Bing must have the same idea, right? Bing Wuqing did not say anything. It was normal for her to express her dissatisfaction with Xue Jianfeng's decision, but it would be a little too obvious if she forcefully voted for Lung Lung. Therefore, she could only maintain her usual style and ignore it. After that, the leading senior brothers of the other primordial sects also expressed their opinions one after another. Soon Xianijia got the tabulation results. Lung Lung has 7 votes, and Duan Muyu has 4 votes. So according to the voting results, Lung Lung should be the winner of this round, Xianijia announced. How could it be? Xue Jianfeng was very surprised. The result was really unexpected. He thought that with the strength of the gold core stage that he had shown before and the prestige he had in the past, he would definitely be able to get hundreds of people to respond to his call. The leading senior brothers of the other primordial sects would definitely curry favor with him. Who would have thought that everyone would go to curry favor with Lin Yi? Admittedly, the strength of the gold core stage that Xue Jianfeng had shown was a little scary, but in the end he was just a beginner gold core stage expert. He could at most be a little deterrent to the crowd, but it was really too much to ask everyone to curry favor with him. Every primordial sect had a group of gold core stage experts. Even if they really did curry favor with Xue Jianfeng, what good would it do them?